Step out the car, boy. Hands where I can see 'em. And I mean now. The flashlight hit like a slap. White beam straight through the driver's side window, pinning the man behind the wheel in a cone of light that turned his face into a target. Red and blue strobes painted the strip mall parking lot in alternating bruises. The engine was already off. The hands were already on the wheel, 10 and 2. Fingers spread, visible. The police captain, who had just called a 28-year-old man boy, did not know that the rental Camry he was leaning into belonged to someone who could purchase every building on this block with a single phone call. He would find out. But not before he destroyed his own career in the process. The 911 recording would later be entered into federal evidence. Chatham County Dispatch, call ID 7741, received 6:43 p.m. October 11th. A male voice, muffled, speaking quickly. Black male, late 20s, sitting in a parked sedan on Abercorn near 12 Oaks. Been there about 20 minutes. Looks like he's casing the strip mall. The operator's voice came through flat, procedural. Can you describe the specific suspicious activity, sir? He's just sitting there, in a hoodie. It doesn't look right. The operator asked for a callback number. The line went dead. No name, no description of criminal behavior. Just a man existing in a parking lot, and someone else deciding that existence was a crime worth reporting. The driver's side door opened slowly, one foot on the asphalt, then the other. A young black man unfolded from the rental car with the deliberate calm of someone who understood exactly what sudden movements cost in moments like this. Hoodie, jeans, no jewelry, no visible anything except dark skin and 2 empty hands held at shoulder height. The flashlight tracked him like a scope. If you think this is just another traffic stop, you are wrong. What this officer doesn't know about the man he just called boy will destroy everything he's built. Stay with me. 12 hours earlier, Malik Drayton had walked through the arrivals gate at Savannah Hilton Head International with 1 duffel bag and a prepaid phone. No driver waiting, no entourage, no car service holding a sign with his name. He collected a mid-tier rental from the counter, gray Toyota Camry, the most forgettable vehicle in the American fleet, signed the paperwork with an LLC name, and drove toward the historic district without looking at the GPS. He already knew the route. The hotel was mid-range. Bay Street. Nothing that would turn heads or linger in memory. He paid with a business card registered to a holding company 3 layers removed from anything carrying his actual name. The front desk clerk, a white woman in her early 50s, glanced at the card, glanced at his hoodie, and hesitated for exactly 1.5 seconds before processing the reservation. That hesitation was a language Malik spoke fluently. He had been reading it since he was 12. He tipped exactly 15% on the room service coffee he ordered an hour later. Not generous enough to be remembered, not cheap enough to generate resentment. The mathematics of invisibility. Before entering the hotel room, he paused at the threshold. His eyes moved left, right, down the hallway in both directions. He counted doors to the stairwell. 7 on the left, 4 on the right. Noted the fire exit sign glowing green at the far end. Inside, he checked the window latch, the bathroom, behind the shower curtain, the closet. He placed his duffel on the desk with the zipper facing the door. Folded his jacket over the chair back with the inside pocket positioned for a 3-second grab. These movements were automatic, unconscious. The way a person scratches an itch or checks a rearview mirror, muscle memory so deep it had become invisible to anyone watching. A habit that belonged to someone who had spent years in environments where the distance between safety and catastrophe was measured in seconds and inches. No one in the hotel lobby gave it a second thought. No one saw anything except a young man in a hoodie checking into a mid-range room. And that was exactly the point. By 10 a.m., Malik was standing inside a vacant commercial property on Drayton Street, 3 blocks from the river. The space was 12,000 square feet, formerly a restaurant supply warehouse, now stripped to concrete floors and exposed ductwork. The kind of property that looked like nothing and could become anything. The rental agent was a white woman named Carolyn, mid-40s, blonde highlights, heels that clicked on the concrete like a metronome counting down her patience. She had been showing the property for 6 weeks without a serious offer. Her smile when Malik walked in was the particular variety reserved for people she had already decided could not afford what she was selling. "Are you the buyer?" she asked, extending a hand that she pulled back slightly when she noticed his hoodie. "I'm evaluating the property." "Evaluating." The word came back with a thin coating of doubt. "For yourself, or are you representing someone? Does that change the square footage?" The question landed without aggression, without humor, without anything except the quiet observation that the building's dimensions were the same regardless of who was asking about them. Carolyn's smile tightened. She proceeded with the tour, but her narration shifted. Less detail about renovation potential, more emphasis on the price per square foot, the deposit requirements, the credit verification process. The subtle recitation of financial barriers that she assumed would eliminate him from consideration. Malik listened, took no notes, asked 3 questions about the HVAC system, the loading dock access, and whether the property had ever been subject to environmental remediation. The questions were specific enough that Carolyn's expression flickered. People who asked about environmental remediation were not casual browsers. They were people who had purchased commercial property before, multiple times. She did not adjust her assumptions. People rarely do. Outside, Malik paused on the sidewalk to photograph the storefront with his phone. A standard step in any commercial evaluation, documenting the facade, the signage condition, the pedestrian traffic patterns. He had taken 3 photos when a voice interrupted. "Excuse me, can I help you?" A white man in his 60s, wearing a sport coat despite the heat, stood on the adjacent sidewalk with a small dog on a leash. His tone was the particular variety that offers help in the way a locked gate offers passage. Technically possible, practically denied. "Just taking photos of the building," Malik said. "That building is private property. I'm aware, I'm evaluating it for purchase." The man looked at Malik, at the hoodie, at the phone, at the face that did not match whatever template he had constructed for commercial property buyer. The dog strained at its leash, uninterested in its owner's territorial performance. "There's been a lot of crime in this area lately," the man said. The sentence was a weapon disguised as information. It communicated nothing about crime statistics and everything about who was welcome on this sidewalk. "I'd hate for anyone to get the wrong idea about what you're doing out here." "I appreciate your concern," Malik said. The response was a key turned precisely halfway, acknowledging the interaction without conceding to its premise. He pocketed his phone and walked toward the Camry without hurrying. Behind him, the man watched until the car door closed. Then he pulled out his own phone and typed something. A text, a social media post, a note. The content invisible, but the intent unmistakable. Another report. Another record of a black man existing in a space where his presence registered as anomaly rather than norm. Malik started the engine, checked the rear view. The man was still watching. The dog was still straining at the leash. Somewhere in the infrastructure of this neighborhood, the machinery that converted discomfort into surveillance was ticking along, processing one man's presence through the filter of another man's assumptions. 2 hours later, that machinery would produce a 911 call. But before that, there was the coffee shop. Malik parked 2 blocks south and walked to a small cafe that occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian. The interior was exposed brick and reclaimed wood, the aesthetic of gentrification dressed in the language of preservation. He ordered a black coffee. The barista, young, white, nose ring, asked if he wanted to start a tab. When he paid with cash, she counted the bills twice. He sat near the window, opened his phone, reviewed documents, financial models, LLC formations, the draft purchase agreement. To anyone watching, he was a man drinking coffee and looking at his phone. The most ordinary thing in the world. But the phone contained a universe that no one in this cafe would have believed belonged to the man holding it. Property portfolios spanning 4 states, banking relationships with institutions that measured deposits in 8 figures, communications with attorneys and advisors, and a network of associates whose collective influence could rearrange the economic geography of a mid-sized city. He sipped the coffee. It was good. Savannah knew how to make coffee, at least. Through the window, he watched the street. A couple walked past holding hands. A delivery truck double-parked outside a boutique. Normal life. The kind of life that existed in a layer above the one Malik inhabited. A layer where traffic stops were inconveniences rather than existential threats, where walking into a building did not require justification, where the question, "Can I help you?" actually meant what its words suggested. He finished the coffee, left a $2 tip on the counter, walked out into the Savannah afternoon. Outside the property, a patrol car rolled past slowly. The officer behind the wheel, a large man with close-cropped hair and a neck thick enough to strain his collar, looked through the glass at Malik standing on the sidewalk reviewing something on his phone. The look lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds of assessment, categorization, filing. Young, black, hoodie, unfamiliar. The software running behind the officer's eyes was invisible and efficient and produced a result that had nothing to do with criminal behavior and everything to do with pattern recognition trained on bias rather than evidence. The officer was Tate Redmond, 260 pounds, former outside linebacker at Georgia Southern, where he had learned that physical dominance was a form of communication and that compliance could be extracted from anyone if you applied enough pressure to the right points. He had transferred that education seamlessly into law enforcement. Redmond drove past without stopping, but he noted the location, noted the gray Camry parked at the curb, noted the man in the hoodie, filed it all in the part of his brain that would activate later when a dispatch call gave him permission to act on what instinct was already telling him to do. In the coffee shop next to the property, a woman in a sergeant's uniform sat at a window table, watching the same scene through glass. Priscilla Langston, 14 years with Chatham County, controlled the booking desk at the substation the way some people control dinner parties, through the careful management of who got served quickly and who waited. She had an eye for hierarchy, an instinct for social positioning, and a belief, buried so deep she would have denied it under oath, that certain people simply did not belong in certain spaces. She watched Malik step out of the rental agent's office and walk toward his car. $20 says he's not buying anything, she said to the barista without looking away from the window. The barista, 19, black, said nothing. She had learned not to. By 4 p.m., Malik had completed his property evaluation, eaten a sandwich in the Camry, and spent 45 minutes on his phone reviewing documents that Carolyn the rental agent would never see. Financial models, LLC formation papers, a draft purchase agreement prepared by an attorney whose hourly rate exceeded Carolyn's monthly commission. He texted a single message to a number saved without a name. Site looks good. Numbers work. Sending photos tonight. The response came in 11 seconds. Copy. Z monitoring. Check in at 10. He pocketed the phone. The real one, the one that communicated through encrypted channels routed through servers in 3 countries. The decoy phone, a cheap prepaid Samsung, sat in the center console where any officer who searched the vehicle would find it and assume it was his only device. He had been sitting in the strip mall parking lot for 22 minutes when the 911 call was placed. 22 minutes of a black man existing in a space someone had decided he did not belong. The caller never identified himself. The operator never received a description of criminal activity, but the machinery of response had already begun grinding. Dispatch codes, unit assignments, the conversion of one person's discomfort into another person's encounter with armed authority. Malik pulled out of the lot, turned onto Abercorn Street. The evening was settling over Savannah in layers of amber and gray, live oaks trailing moss like curtains across a stage that was about to host a performance no one in the audience would enjoy. 3 blocks later, the lights appeared in his rear view, red and blue, the chirp of a siren, short, sharp, a command dressed as a sound. He signaled, pulled to the shoulder, engine off, window down, hands on the wheel. The sequence was automatic, rehearsed. Not because he had been stopped before, though he had 11 times in 14 years of driving in 6 different states, always in vehicles that were legally registered, always while committing no traffic violation, but because the choreography of surviving a traffic stop as a black man in America was taught the way some families taught table manners or prayers. It was survival curriculum. Boots on asphalt. The flashlight first, then the silhouette behind it. Tate Redmond approached the driver's side with his right hand resting on his duty belt, 2 inches from his service weapon. His body camera was not activated. The small red light that should have been blinking on his chest was dark. License and registration. Malik reached for the glove compartment slowly, narrating his movements the way his mother had taught him when he was 16. Registration is in the glove box. I'm reaching for it now. He handed over his license, Georgia, valid, clean, and the rental agreement. Redmond studied both documents with the intensity of someone looking for a reason rather than reading for information. His flashlight swept the interior, fast food bag on the passenger seat, bottled water in the cup holder, rental agreement folder. Nothing suspicious, nothing illegal, nothing except a black man in a hoodie driving a car he was legally entitled to drive. Redmond returned to his cruiser, ran the plates, ran the license, waited. The dashboard computer returned what it always returned for Malik Drayton. Nothing. No warrants, no priors, no flags. A clean record attached to a name that appeared in no law enforcement database because the people who maintained Malik's public profile were very good at their jobs. This should have been the end. License clean. Plates clean. No traffic violation observed. No criminal activity reported beyond the vague discomfort of an anonymous caller who had already hung up. By every standard of law and procedure, Redmond should have returned the documents, wished Malik a safe evening, and driven away. Instead, he picked up his radio. Dispatch, Unit 4217 requesting supervisor at my location. Abercorn, south of 12 Oaks. Traffic stop. Need a second unit. He did not explain why. Did not articulate reasonable suspicion. Did not cite any specific behavior that justified prolonging the detention. He simply requested backup because the absence of evidence had not satisfied the presence of suspicion, and suspicion in this precinct flowed in one direction. The unmarked SUV arrived 7 minutes later. Black Tahoe, tinted windows, no department markings. The door opened and a man stepped out whose posture announced authority before his badge did. Captain Voss Grady, 22 years with Chatham County, built like a man who had been large his entire life and had learned to use that size as a statement rather than an apology. His uniform was pressed sharp enough to cut. His hat sat low on his forehead, shading eyes that had already rendered judgment before they reached the Camry. Grady walked past Redmond without acknowledgement, the kind of dismissal that communicated hierarchy more effectively than any rank insignia. He approached the driver's window and leaned in, one hand on the roof, the other holding a flashlight that he aimed directly into Malik's face. "Boy, you know why we pulled you over?" The word landed with the weight of 2 centuries. Not a mistake, not a regional colloquialism. A choice. A positioning. A deliberate reduction of a grown man to something smaller, younger, less deserving of the basic respect that sir, or even silence, would have conveyed. "No, sir," Malik said. His voice was level. His hands had not moved from the wheel. "Got a report of a vehicle matching this description involved in suspicious activity in this area." No description had been given in the 911 call beyond black male and sedan. The Camry was gray, the most common rental car color in the southeastern United States. The match was not a vehicle. It was a man's skin. "I understand you have a report." Malik's response was measured, each word placed with the precision of someone accustomed to conversations where language was a tool and carelessness was a liability. "I'd like to know the specific basis for the stop so I can cooperate with the procedure." The word hung in the air. Procedure. Clinical. Precise. Belonging to someone who navigated systems with rules the way a surgeon navigated anatomy. Grady either did not hear it or chose not to register what it implied. His flashlight swept the interior again, slower this time, looking. "Step out of the vehicle." "Am I being detained?" "I said step out." Malik opened the door, stood, hands visible. The October evening pressed against his skin. warm for autumn, heavy with the kind of humidity that made Savannah feel like a city built inside someone's breath. Grady circled him. The flashlight ran from his shoes to his face and back again, cataloging, assessing, searching for something that justified what was about to happen. "I'm going to need to search the vehicle." "I don't consent to a search," Malik said. Quiet, not confrontational, not submissive. The flat recitation of a constitutional right that existed on paper and, in moments like this, existed nowhere else. "But I'm happy to cooperate with anything you're legally authorized to do." Grady's jaw tightened. The muscle beneath his left ear pulsed once, twice, 3 times. The refusal of consent was not a scenario he was accustomed to. In this precinct, on this road, with this badge, people did not say no. They stammered. They apologized. They opened their trunks and their glove boxes and their privacy because the alternative, the escalation that followed refusal, was a price most people could not afford to pay. But Malik Drayton was not most people, and the price he was about to pay was one he had calculated in advance. "I'm detecting an odor of narcotics from the vehicle," Grady said. There was no odor. The Camry smelled like fast food and bottled water, and the synthetic cleanliness of a rental car that had been detailed 12 hours ago. The claim was fabricated. The oldest trick in the probable cause playbook, a phrase designed to convert a constitutionally protected refusal into a legally permissible search. It worked because it was nearly impossible to disprove. How do you prove the absence of a smell? Grady did not wait for a response. He gestured to Redmond. "Search the vehicle." Redmond moved to the Camry, opened the driver's door, began pulling apart the interior, glove box, center console, under seats, trunk release. The rental agreement folder spilled across the passenger seat. The fast food bag was opened and inspected as though a chicken sandwich might conceal contraband. Malik stood on the shoulder of Abercorn Street and watched a man destroy the interior of a car he had rented 12 hours ago. His hands remained at his sides. His face remained still. The stillness was not resignation. It was the practiced discipline of someone who understood that everything happening to him was being recorded, not by the body cameras that should have been active and were not, but by the phone wedged between the driver's seat and the center console, its voice memo app counting upward in the darkness. 37 minutes. 38. Redmond found nothing, because there was nothing to find. He returned to Grady, shaking his head. The head shake was small, almost imperceptible, the kind of communication that happens between officers who have worked together long enough to speak in gestures. Nothing in the car. No drugs, no weapons, no contraband, no justification for what they had already done and were about to do worse. Grady's face did not change. The absence of evidence did not produce the response it should have: release, apology, a sheepish return of documents. Instead, it produced what absence of evidence always produces in men who have already decided on a conclusion: escalation. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "On what charge?" "Obstruction. You failed to comply with a lawful order." "I complied with every instruction you gave. I exited the vehicle when asked. I've been cooperative throughout this encounter." "Are you telling me how to do my job, boy?" There it was again. Boy. Twice in 10 minutes. Not an accident, not a slip. A declaration of how this man saw the world and where Malik fit inside it. Somewhere below adult, below equal, below the threshold of respect that Grady extended automatically to people who looked like him. The handcuffs came out. Malik turned, slowly, placed his hands behind his back. The metal closed around his wrists with a sound that was quieter than it should have been for something that carried so much weight. Click, click. Cold steel against warm skin. Redmond grabbed the connecting chain between the cuffs and lifted, a pain compliance technique wrenching Malik's shoulders upward and backward. The pain was immediate, sharp, radiating from wrists to shoulders like electricity following a wire. Malik's breath caught. His knees bent slightly. Involuntary, the body's response to sudden agony. "Walk," Redmond said. Malik walked, toward the patrol car, across asphalt that still held the day's heat, past the Camry with its doors hanging open, its interior scattered, its rental agreement lying on the shoulder like a discarded receipt. Inside the vehicle, wedged in the gap it had slid into during the search, the phone's voice memo timer crossed 41 minutes. And no one in this precinct would know it existed for the next 14 hours. The patrol car smelled like pine air freshener, layered over old coffee, layered over the institutional odor of vinyl seats, absorbing years of human fear. Malik sat in the back, hands cuffed behind him. The position forced his shoulders into an angle that turned discomfort into a low, constant burn. The divider screen between front and back seats was scratched plexiglass, the kind of surface that held fingerprints like a ledger of everyone who had ever pressed their face against it trying to see what was coming. Redmond drove, did not speak. The radio squawked with dispatch traffic. Other calls, other units, the ambient noise of a county that kept its officers busy with the small machinery of enforcement. Malik listened, counted intersections, tracked the route by feel. Right turn off Abercorn, south on Waters, through a residential stretch where porch lights made yellow squares on dark lawns. 7 minutes. The substation appeared, a low concrete building set back from the road behind a chain-link fence and a parking lot with more potholes than vehicles. Built in the 70s, maintained since then only by inertia. Small windows, flat roof, the architecture of institutional authority designed for function rather than invitation. The rear entrance, reserved for intake. The door buzzed open before they reached it. Someone inside had been watching the monitors. Redmond gripped Malik's upper arm and steered him through the doorway with more force than navigation required. Malik's shoulder caught the doorframe. The impact was solid. Metal frame against bone, the kind of contact that would leave a bruise in the shape of the building's architecture. He did not stumble. The impact registered, a sharp flare in his right shoulder, but his feet stayed under him. His body absorbed the collision the way something trained absorbs force. Not by resisting it, but by moving with it, redirecting momentum, staying vertical. It was the kind of response that came from years of practice in environments where falling down meant something worse than bruising. Redmond did not notice the sophistication of the recovery. He saw only compliance, which was what he expected to see, and therefore all he was capable of seeing. The booking area was fluorescent lit and understaffed. 2 desks, one occupied. The clock on the wall showed 7:22 p.m. Behind the desk sat Sergeant Priscilla Langston, still in uniform from her shift, though her shift had technically ended at 7. She stayed late on Fridays. Fridays were when the interesting arrests came in. She looked up as Redmond guided Malik to the counter. Her eyes performed the same calculation Redmond's had on Drayton Street. Young, black, hoodie, cuffed, and arrived at the same conclusion. Another one. Friday night inventory. "Name," she said, pulling a booking form toward her without standing. "Malik Drayton." She typed with 2 fingers. Slowly, each keystroke deliberate, spaced, the rhythm of someone who understood that time was a weapon and she controlled its distribution. She asked him to spell his last name. He did. She typed it wrong, Drayton, then squinted at the screen, deleted, retyped, asked him to spell it again. Drayton. Date of birth. He gave it. She typed it, slowly. Address. He gave the address of the LLC's registered agent, a commercial suite in Atlanta that received mail and forwarded nothing. Langston typed it without looking up. Did not ask why a man arrested in Savannah listed an Atlanta address. Did not ask anything that might have revealed the gap between who she assumed he was and who he actually was. "When can I make my phone call?" Malik asked. Langston's fingers paused on the keyboard. She looked at him for the first time, not at his paperwork, not at her screen, but at his face. The look was the particular variety that communicated assessment and dismissal simultaneously. "When I say you can." Georgia Code Section 17-4-62 provides for communication access within a reasonable time following booking. The statute number landed on the desk like a dropped coin. Langston's typing stopped entirely. She stared at him. The expression was not surprise. It was the discomfort of someone whose authority had just been questioned with a specificity that left no room for the usual deflections. "Are you a lawyer?" The question was half accusation, half recalibration. "I'm asking when I can make my phone call. After processing takes as long as processing takes." She returned to the keyboard. The typing speed did not increase. If you think things can't get worse for Malik, you haven't been paying attention. What happens inside this station will make the traffic stop look like a courtesy. Keep watching. The processing took 2 hours and 14 minutes. It should have taken 40. Langston left the desk 3 times. Once for coffee, once for a conversation with a colleague in the corridor that lasted 19 minutes and produced laughter that carried through the walls, once to use the restroom. Each absence was a message. You are not a priority. Your time is mine. Your comfort is irrelevant. During the 3rd absence, Malik sat handcuffed to a metal chair beside the booking desk and studied the room. 2 cameras, one covering the main entrance, one covering the booking counter. A 3rd camera mount in the ceiling corner near the corridor, but the camera itself was missing. An empty bracket with exposed wiring, the technical infrastructure of accountability removed and never replaced. The corridor leading to holding had no visible cameras at all. He noted the door codes. Each officer who entered punched a 4-digit sequence into a keypad, and each punched it with enough carelessness that the tones were audible from 20 feet. 3737. The same code for every door. The security equivalent of leaving a key under the mat. He counted officers. 2 on the overnight shift based on the parking lot, Redmond's cruiser and 1 other. Langston was staying late by choice, not assignment. Grady had not yet arrived at the station. He would. Malik was certain of that. A captain who personally responded to a routine traffic stop did not do so out of diligence. He did so because the stop mattered to him, and things that mattered to Grady did not end at the booking desk. At 9:36 p.m., the corridor door opened and a man Malik had not seen before entered the booking area. Younger than Redmond, thinner, with the posture of someone who spent more time at desks than in patrol cars. His nameplate read, Henshaw, Deputy Milo Henshaw, the precinct's resident report writer, the man who converted encounters into narratives and narratives into justifications. Henshaw sat at the second desk, opened a laptop, began typing with a speed that contrasted sharply with Langston's deliberate pace. He was not writing slowly. He was writing confidently. The confidence of someone who had done this many times and knew exactly which words to use and which to avoid. Malik could not see the screen from his position at the booking chair, but he could hear the rhythm of the typing. Fast bursts followed by pauses, the pattern of someone composing rather than transcribing. Henshaw was not recording what had happened. He was constructing what needed to have happened. The arrest report would later be entered into evidence. Incident Report YR-2024-10-11-0847. Reporting Officer, Officer T. Redmond. Supervising Officer, Captain V. Grady. Subject exhibited signs of impairment including slowed speech, dilated pupils, and inability to provide coherent responses to routine questions. Malik's speech had been measured, not slowed. His pupils had been normal. The body cam footage, when it was eventually recovered, would confirm this. His responses had been precise, legally informed, and coherent enough to cite statute numbers from memory. But Henshaw's narrative required impairment, because impairment justified the search, and the search needed justification after the fact, because it had been conducted without any before. Upon approach, subject made furtive movements toward the center console, consistent with concealment of contraband or weapon. Malik's hands had been at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. The body cam timestamp, 6:47 p.m., would show this clearly. The furtive movement was a legal fiction, a phrase that appeared in approximately 37% of Chatham County arrest reports involving black male subjects and in approximately 4% of reports involving white male subjects. Henshaw did not know this statistic, but the DOJ would, in approximately 3 months, when the pattern or practice investigation began pulling his reports for analysis. Subject refused to comply with lawful orders and became verbally aggressive when asked to exit the vehicle. Malik had exited the vehicle when asked. He had not raised his voice. The word aggressive in this context meant the same thing it always meant in reports like these. A black man had spoken in complete sentences, and the officer had interpreted articulacy as hostility. Henshaw finished the report at 10:17 p.m., printed it, slid it into a folder, left without looking at Malik, without acknowledging his presence, without any indication that the human subject of his fiction was sitting 12 feet away, listening to every keystroke. At 10:22 p.m., Corporal Jensen Wick arrived for what Langston described as property processing. Wick was wiry, mid-30s, with the restless energy of someone who found stillness uncomfortable and filled it with small, purposeful movements. He carried himself with the particular confidence of a man who believed he was smarter than everyone around him and had never been sufficiently challenged to discover otherwise. He collected the items taken from Malik during booking: wallet, phone, the decoy Samsung, rental keys, the fast food receipt, and Malik's jacket. Spread them across the property counter, began inventorying each item with a clipboard and a pen that he clicked compulsively between entries. Then he paused, looked at the booking camera, the one mounted above the counter, red light steady, looked at the corridor leading to the secondary storage area. A partition wall separated the counter from the storage shelves, chest height, opaque, blocking the camera's angle on anything below counter level on the far side. Wick stepped behind the partition. He was out of the main camera's frame for 11 seconds. When he returned, he was holding Malik's jacket in one hand. In the other, held between gloved thumb and forefinger, was a small clear plastic baggie containing 12 white pills. "What's this?" Wick's voice carried the particular note of rehearsed surprise that actors call indication, the performance of discovery rather than the reality of it. He held the baggie up to the light. Found in subject's left jacket pocket. Unidentified pills. No prescription label. Malik looked at the baggie from 12 feet away, handcuffed to a chair, and felt the architecture of the trap close around him with the precision of something designed rather than improvised. They had graduated from false reports to manufactured evidence. The escalation was textbook, each step building on the last, each violation creating the foundation for the next, the institutional machinery of destruction operating with the efficiency of a system that had done this hundreds of times before. But Malik Drayton had not survived 8 years in his world by failing to notice details that other people missed. And the detail that Jensen Wick had missed was small enough to be invisible to anyone who was not looking for it, and devastating enough to end a career. "Those are not mine," Malik said. His voice was directed at the booking camera, not at Wick, not at Langston, but at the lens that was recording everything. "I had no pills in any pocket. Check the initial pat-down report. Officer Redmond's field search found no controlled substances at the scene." Wick's expression did not change. He had expected denial. Denial was part of the script. "We found them in your jacket. That's possession." Malik continued looking at the camera. "The pills are white, round, scored. Generic oxycodone, 5 milligram. The lot number sticker on that baggie uses CVS Pharmacy regional formatting, prefix 74, distribution hub southeastern. The nearest CVS location in this zip code closed 18 months ago. That baggie didn't come from any pharmacy I could have visited. You might want to check your own evidence inventory." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses against eardrums, that fills a room the way water fills a sinking ship, slowly at first, then all at once. Wick's hand, still holding the baggie, did not move. His face cycled through a sequence of expressions that he could not control, and that the booking camera captured in unforgiving detail: surprise, calculation, the particular blankness of a man realizing that the trap he had set contained a flaw he had not anticipated. Langston stopped typing. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard as though the keys had become hot. She looked at Wick. Wick did not look back. The booking camera's red light blinked, steady, patient, recording everything with the mechanical indifference of a device that did not care who was guilty and who was framed, but would preserve the evidence of both with equal fidelity. Wick recovered, slid the baggie into an evidence envelope, labeled it, logged it in the property inventory as though the last 30 seconds had not happened, as though a handcuffed man had not just identified the provenance of planted evidence with a precision that belonged in a forensic laboratory rather than a county booking desk. He did not respond to Malik's observation. He did not need to. In 3 months, when the grand jury reviewed the booking footage, Wick's 11 seconds behind the partition and Malik's 4-second analysis of the lot number format would combine to produce the kind of evidence that prosecutors called gift-wrapped. But that was 3 months away. Tonight, the pills were logged as found on Malik's person, and the charge of possession was added to the booking sheet next to obstruction. 2 charges. Both fabricated. Both documented. Both building toward a weight that Wick and Langston and Grady assumed would crush the man they had decided to destroy. They did not know that the weight was building in the opposite direction. Redmond came for him at 10:51 p.m. The holding cells were down a corridor that turned twice, left, then right, a layout that placed them beyond the sight line of anyone at the booking desk and beyond the range of any functioning camera. The corridor camera mount was empty, same as the one in the booking area. 2 blind spots, not accidental. The infrastructure of accountability had been selectively dismantled in the exact locations where accountability was most needed. Redmond gripped Malik's arm above the elbow and walked him toward holding. The grip was not guidance, it was control. Fingers pressing deep enough to compress muscle against bone. The kind of contact that communicated dominance through pain rather than words. Halfway down the corridor, in the gap between the second turn and the holding cell door, Redmond stopped. The corridor was empty. No cameras, no witnesses, no oversight. Just 2 men in a concrete hallway, one of whom held all the visible power, and one of whom held all the invisible power, and neither of whom knew the full extent of what the other was carrying. "You think you're smart," Redmond said. His voice was low, conversational, the tone of a man who was about to do something he wanted to be able to deny later. "Talking about lot numbers and pharmacy codes. You think that helps you?" "I think the truth is useful in most situations." Redmond's hand moved from Malik's arm to the back of his neck. The grip was sudden, vice-like, fingers closing around the tendons with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before and knew exactly how much pressure produced compliance without leaving marks that would photograph clearly. He drove Malik forward, face first toward the wall. The impact was controlled, not hard enough to break anything, hard enough to announce that breakage was available if requested. Malik's forehead hit the concrete. His vision flashed white. His knees buckled, and Redmond let him drop to one knee before hauling him back upright by the collar of his hoodie. "Lot numbers," Redmond repeated. His breath was close now, warm against Malik's ear. "Nobody cares about lot numbers. You know what they care about? What the report says. And the report says you had pills. The report says you resisted. The report says whatever Captain Grady decides it says. And Captain Grady decides everything in this building." He shoved Malik the remaining 8 feet to the holding cell door. The door opened with a metallic shriek. Inside, concrete bench, steel toilet, no blanket, no pillow, the smell of industrial cleaner failing to mask decades of institutional neglect. Redmond removed one cuff, threaded it through a wall-mounted ring, and reattached it. Malik was now tethered to the wall with approximately 3 feet of movement in any direction. Enough to sit on the bench, not enough to reach the door. "Comfortable?" Redmond asked. He did not wait for an answer. He reached for Malik's hoodie and yanked the hood down, hard, the fabric pulling tight against Malik's throat before sliding free. A petty act, a child's cruelty dressed in adult authority. The kind of gesture that existed solely to remind the person on the receiving end that their body was not their own, that even the position of their clothing was subject to someone else's decision. Malik's neck burned where the fabric had dragged. He did not adjust the hoodie, did not give Redmond the satisfaction of seeing him repair what had been disrupted. "Phone call?" Malik asked. Redmond was already walking away. The cell door closed with a sound that resonated through the concrete like a period at the end of a sentence. 40 minutes later, Redmond returned. Not for a phone call. He carried a clipboard, the property inventory form, already filled out, requiring the detainee's signature. "Sign this." Malik read it from his position on the bench. The form listed his personal effects: wallet, phone, keys, jacket, and at the bottom, added in different ink, in handwriting that did not match the rest of the document. 1. Clear plastic bag containing 12 white pills, unidentified. I'm not signing a document that lists items that were planted on me. Redmond set the clipboard on the bench, leaned into the cell. His face was close enough that Malik could see the broken capillaries in his nose, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the tension in his jaw that suggested a man who was not accustomed to having his directives questioned. You sign it, or I write refuse to cooperate on the form, and the judge adds obstruction to your charges. Refusal to sign a falsified inventory is not obstruction under Georgia law. It's actually a protected right under the Fourth Amendment. I'm not required to authenticate a document I believe contains fabricated evidence. Redmond straightened. His right hand opened and closed at his side, a fist forming and releasing, the mechanical rhythm of a man deciding whether the satisfaction of hitting someone outweighed the risk of visible injury. The calculation took 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Malik watched the man's eyes and saw the decision tip toward restraint. Not because restraint was Redmond's natural inclination, but because Grady's arrival was imminent, and officers who damaged prisoners before the captain had a chance to assess the situation received consequences, not for the damage itself, but for the presumption of acting without authorization. Redmond picked up the clipboard, wrote "refused" in block letters across the signature line, left without speaking. The cell door slammed hard enough to rattle the steel toilet. The holding area contained 3 cells. Malik occupied the second. The first was empty. The third held 2 men, one asleep on the bench, one sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, muttering to himself in a cadence that suggested intoxication rather than distress. Malik sat, adjusted his position to minimize the pull of the cuff on his right wrist, closed his eyes, breathed, counted heartbeats, a technique that occupied the conscious mind while the unconscious mind processed and cataloged. He was not resting. He was organizing. The building had rhythms. He had been listening since the moment Redmond drove him through the rear entrance, and in 2 hours and 29 minutes of observation, the rhythms had become legible. Shift change at 11 p.m., footsteps, voices, the beeping of the keypad, 3737, as overnight officers entered and day shift officers left. Patrol departure at 11:20, engine sounds in the parking lot, the substation emptying to skeleton crew, door checks at irregular intervals, someone walking the corridor, glancing through the cell windows without stopping, the minimum gesture of supervision. At 11:47 p.m., the drunk man in cell 3 woke up and began shouting, Hey you! What are you looking at?" The target of his aggression was the younger man sitting on the floor, early 20s, thin, arrested for something minor enough that he had not been processed beyond initial intake. The young man looked up. Fear was visible in the way he pressed himself against the wall, making himself smaller, the instinctive geometry of someone who had learned that occupying less space meant absorbing less violence. The drunk stood, swayed, advanced. His hands were fists, loose but closing. The cell was 10 feet by 8, not enough room to maintain distance, not enough room to escape. Malik opened his eyes. You don't want to do that. The voice came from cell 2. Calm, low, not loud enough to be a shout, not quiet enough to be ignored. The drunk turned, looked through the bars separating the cells, saw a young man in a hoodie, cuffed to the wall, who somehow did not look like a man cuffed to a wall. Who looked, despite the restraints and the concrete and the fluorescent lights turning everything the color of exhaustion, like someone in complete control of whatever was about to happen. Mind your business, the drunk said. That man has been booked, but not charged. If you assault him in a detention facility, that's aggravated battery. Georgia Code Section 16-5-24. Your current charge, which I'm guessing is DUI based on the intake timeline, carries a fine and license suspension. Aggravated battery in custody carries 2 to 20. You're about to trade a misdemeanor for a felony that puts you in state prison. Sit down, cool off. You'll see a judge faster with clean hands. The statute number, the sentencing range, the tactical assessment of the situation delivered with the same precision Malik had used to disassemble the planted pills. Too much knowledge for a man in a hoodie, too much command for a man in handcuffs. The drunk stared. The younger man stared. The guard who had been walking the corridor, summoned by the shouting but not yet through the door, paused on the other side of the reinforced glass and stared. The drunk sat down, not because the legal analysis persuaded him, because something in Malik's voice, a quality that could not be faked, a gravity that came from years of navigating rooms where consequences were not hypothetical, made sitting down feel like the only safe option. The younger man exhaled, looked at Malik through the bars, mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Malik closed his eyes again. The guard who had witnessed the exchange through the corridor window did not enter, did not intervene, did not file an incident report, because filing an incident report would require explaining why he had not been the one to de-escalate the situation. But he looked at Malik differently after that, the way people look at something they cannot categorize, something that does not fit the available labels. Hours passed. No phone call, no water, no food. The overhead light stayed on, harsh, white, the kind of illumination designed to prevent sleep by preventing darkness. Malik sat with his back against the wall. Not sleeping. Listening. The building's rhythms continued. Door codes, footsteps, the ambient noise of a precinct operating at minimum capacity through the small hours of a Saturday morning. At 2:15 a.m., new footsteps in the corridor. Heavier than the guards, deliberate. Not patrol pattern, someone with purpose. Voss Grady appeared outside the cell. He had changed out of his uniform, civilian clothes now, khakis and a polo shirt, nothing identifying him as law enforcement. The kind of wardrobe choice that created plausible deniability about official capacity. He was not here as Captain Grady. He was here as Voss Grady, private citizen, who happened to be standing outside a holding cell at 2 a.m. He was alone. No second officer, no witness. The corridor had no cameras. The violation of custody protocol was so textbook that it would later appear in the FBI's training materials as an example of institutional failure. Comfortable, boy? The 3rd time. Each repetition a conscious choice. Each landing a little heavier than the last. The way repeated blows to the same spot transform bruise into fracture. Malik opened his eyes. Did not stand. Did not give Grady the satisfaction of verticality, of the appearance of attention or respect. He looked at the man who had arrested him from a seated position, which meant looking up, which meant that Grady could interpret the angle as deference when it was actually assessment. "I'd like my phone call." "Phone's broken." "Which phone?" "All of them." Grady leaned against the cell bars, his arms crossed, his weight shifting forward, the posture of a man who had all night and wanted you to know it. He studied Malik with the intensity of someone trying to solve a problem that refused to present itself in familiar terms. "You're not what I expected," Grady said. "What did you expect?" "Someone scared. Someone cooperative. Someone who understands how things work around here." "I understand exactly how things work around here. That's why I asked for my phone call 3 hours ago." Grady's jaw worked. The muscle beneath his ear, the same one that had pulsed during the traffic stop, was ticking again, the physiological signature of a man whose authority was being challenged by something he could not identify and therefore could not defeat. Who are you, really? The question came out with genuine curiosity underneath the intimidation. You're not just some kid in a hoodie. I've been doing this 22 years. I know the difference. I'm the man you arrested without probable cause. That's all you need to know tonight. Grady pushed off the bars, paced, 3 steps left, 3 steps right. The corridor was narrow enough that his shoulders nearly brushed the walls on each turn. He was working through something, a calculation, a decision, a risk assessment that was producing results he did not like. The pills we found, that were planted, carry a charge, possession. Combined with the obstruction, you're looking at county time. Maybe more, depending on how the DA reads the report. The report that Deputy Henshaw wrote describing impairment and furtive movements that didn't occur? That report? Grady stopped pacing. The stillness was worse than the movement. A man in motion is deciding. A man who has stopped has already decided. He stepped to the cell door, pulled out a key, opened it, stepped inside, closed it behind him. The corridor was empty. The building was silent. 2 men in a concrete box, one holding the key, one holding information that the key holder could not afford to let reach daylight. Listen to me carefully. Grady's voice dropped. Not a whisper. Something lower. Something meant to travel 3 feet and no further. I don't know who you think you are or what you think you know, but in this building, in this county, I am the law. The judges are mine. The DA knows better than to question my arrests. The complaint process goes through my office. There is no appeal. There is no oversight. There is no one coming to help you. You sit here until Monday. You see a judge who owes me a favor. You plead to a misdemeanor. You pay a fine. You leave, and you never come back to my county. He paused. Let the architecture of the threat settle into the space between them. Or you make this difficult. You call lawyers, you file complaints, you cite statutes like you're something special. And I make sure the next 48 hours are the worst of your life. Your choice. Malik looked at Grady, at the man's eyes, which were the color of slate and contained the particular certainty of someone who had never been proven wrong, and had therefore concluded that he never could be, at his hands, which hung at his sides with the relaxed confidence of a man standing in his own territory, at the key still in his right hand, the small piece of metal that represented, in this moment, everything that separated authority from powerlessness. I choose the phone call, Malik said. Grady's hand moved fast. The open palm connected with the side of Malik's face. Not a punch, something worse in its way. A slap, the most degrading form of physical contact one adult can inflict on another. The sound was sharp, contained, the acoustic signature of a man who had calibrated the force to humiliate rather than injure, to leave a sting rather than a mark, to communicate contempt with the precision of someone who had practiced on others before. Malik's head turned with the impact. His left ear rang. His cheek burned. He did not raise his hands. They were cuffed to the wall and could not have reached his face anyway. But the impulse was present, the ancient reflex to protect, to cover, to defend the part of the body that had just been violated. He turned his face back, looked at Grady, said nothing. The silence was more eloquent than any response. It said, I am recording this. Not with a device, with memory, with the patient, comprehensive, unforgiving memory of someone who has been trained to catalog violence the way an accountant catalogs transactions, dates, times, methods, outcomes, evidence. Grady read the silence. It made him uncomfortable. Uncomfortable men with authority in concrete rooms at 2 a.m. make dangerous choices, and Grady's next choice was to leave. He stepped out of the cell, locked the door, stood in the corridor for a moment, looking at Malik through the bars the way a man looks at a locked box when he cannot find the combination. Monday, Grady said. Judge Harlan, courtroom B, 9 a.m. Be smart, boy. He walked away. His footsteps echoed down the corridor, around the two turns, through the booking area, and out of the building. The door buzzed. The night swallowed the sound of his engine starting. Malik sat in the silence that followed. His cheek throbbed. The left side of his face was warm. The heat of disrupted capillaries, of blood rushing to the surface in the body's confused attempt to repair what had been damaged. His wrists ached where the cuffs had twisted. His right shoulder still carried the dull memory of the doorframe impact. He touched his tongue to the inside of his cheek. No blood. Grady's calibration had been precise, enough force to degrade, insufficient force to leave the kind of evidence that photographed well. This was not the captain's first time. The technique had been practiced, refined, applied to other men in other cells during other nights when the cameras were conveniently absent and the corridor was conveniently empty. Malik added the slap to the catalog. Date, October 12th. Time, approximately 2:20 a.m. Location, Holding Cell 2, Chatham County Substation. Method, open hand strike to left side of face. Witnesses, none present. Recording, none visible, though Hargrove's secondary device in the corridor bracket might have captured audio if its microphone range extended past the second turn. He organized the catalog the way he organized everything, systematically, without emotion, with the precision of someone who understood that rage was a luxury and documentation was a weapon. The catalog now contained 1 illegal traffic stop, 1 fabricated probable cause claim, 1 warrantless vehicle search, 1 arrest on false obstruction charges, 1 evidence plant, 1 falsified arrest report, 1 denial of phone call access for 11 hours and counting, 1 use of excessive force during transport, doorframe, 1 unauthorized cell entry without secondary officer present, 1 physical assault, slap, and 3 uses of a racial epithet by a commanding officer. 12 violations, 14 hours. Not a single one would matter if they remained inside this building, processed through a complaint system that Grady controlled, reviewed by supervisors who owed Grady favors, adjudicated by a judicial system that Grady had described, with complete accuracy, as his own. But they were not going to remain inside this building. The phone in the Camry, the real phone, wedged in its gap, its voice memo app still counting, had recorded the traffic stop, the search, and the arrest. The booking camera had recorded the evidence plant. Hargrove's backup device might have recorded portions of the overnight. And somewhere in Atlanta, a woman who had not heard from Malik in 8 hours was not going back to sleep. He was not afraid. Fear was a luxury that required the belief that the current situation was the worst possible outcome. Malik had been in worse rooms, had faced worse men, had survived conversations where the distance between living and not living was measured in the time it took someone to change their mind about pulling a trigger. What he felt was not fear, it was patience. The particular, disciplined, costly patience of a man who was building something with every minute of his detention, something constructed from violations and timestamps and statute numbers, and the recorded evidence of institutional corruption that would, when delivered to the right hands, produce consequences that Voss Grady could not imagine, because they existed outside the boundaries of his experience. Grady had spent 22 years in a system that protected him. That system had taught him that consequences were things that happened to other people, to the men and women who sat in his holding cells, who stood on the shoulder of his roads, who existed in his county at his discretion. He had never been the subject of a federal investigation, had never seen his own name on a warrant, had never experienced the particular vertigo of discovering that the power he wielded was not his own, but was borrowed from an institution that could, and eventually would, take it back. He was about to learn. The station thinks they've broken him. They don't know that every violation they've committed tonight is being cataloged for a federal case file. What happens at 8 a.m. Saturday morning will be the worst moment of Captain Grady's career. Stay right here. Part 2 drops everything. At 5:45 a.m., the overnight shift changed. New footsteps, new rhythms. The door code beeped, 3737. And a man Malik had not heard before walked the corridor. The footsteps paused outside his cell, longer than the patrol pattern, long enough to suggest deliberation rather than routine. The man was older, 50-something. The nameplate on his uniform read Hargrove. Desk Sergeant Earl Hargrove, 30 years with Chatham County, the kind of officer who had survived 3 decades of institutional politics by developing an instinct for when the wind was about to change direction. Hargrove looked at Malik through the cell bars. Then he did something that no one in this building had done in the 11 hours since Malik's arrival. He pulled out his personal phone, typed something into a database that was not the department's standard system, read the results. His face changed. Not fear, not surprise. The careful, deliberate blankness of a man who had just realized that the building he was standing in was on fire and no one else could smell the smoke. "Mr. Drayton." The words were quiet, respectful, the courtesy so out of place in this corridor that it sounded like a foreign language. "Can I get you water? Coffee?" Mister. Not boy, not suspect, not a last name barked through bars. The single word carried a weight that had nothing to do with politeness and everything to do with recognition. The recognition of a man who had looked up a name and found something behind it that made him recalculate every assumption the night shift had operated on. Malik studied Hargrove, saw the recognition, saw the careful decision to extend a courtesy that could not be explained without revealing what he had discovered, saw the calculation of a man who had 30 years of institutional knowledge and was using all of it to position himself on the correct side of whatever was coming. "Water would be appreciated," Malik said. Hargrove nodded, left, returned with a bottle, sealed, not tap. He passed it through the bars without commentary. Then he walked to the far end of the corridor and did something with the junction box mounted on the wall near the ceiling. A small red light appeared on the corridor camera mount, the mount that had been empty since Malik arrived. The camera was still missing, but the mounting bracket had a secondary recording device built into its base, a backup system installed during a renovation 3 years ago and subsequently forgotten by everyone except the facilities staff and one desk sergeant, who made it his business to know where every piece of recording equipment was located in his building. Hargrove activated it, said nothing, returned to the booking desk. He did not explain the water, did not explain the camera, did not explain the quiet urgency with which he began reviewing every piece of paperwork generated during the overnight shift, the arrest report, the property inventory, the booking log, comparing timestamps, cross-referencing entries, building his own file of discrepancies that he would need later, when the questions started and the people who had been in charge during the night began looking for subordinates to blame. At 6:15 a.m., Hargrove made a phone call from his personal cell. Not the desk phone, not the department line. His personal phone, held close to his mouth, voice lowered to a register that did not carry beyond the booking desk. "Judge Peralta's clerk, this is Desk Sergeant Hargrove, Chatham County. I need to confirm an emergency filing. Attorney name Okafor. Deshaun Okafor. Case involves a detainee at our substation, habeas corpus." He listened, nodded, hung up, looked toward the corridor where Malik sat in a cell that had held him for 11 hours without a phone call, without food, without the basic procedural protections that the law required, and that this substation had decided he did not deserve. Hargrove opened his personal laptop, began typing an email. The recipient address was not a department account. It was a personal Gmail, the kind of communication channel that existed outside the institutional architecture of a precinct where the captain controlled what was reported and what disappeared. The email contained 3 attachments: the arrest report with its fabricated narrative, the property inventory with its impossible pills, and the booking log showing an 11-hour gap between intake and first offered phone call. The subject line read, "Incident, Drayton, October 11th, irregularities." He sent it, closed the laptop, returned to his desk, resumed the blank expression of a man who had done nothing unusual and had no reason to be asked about anything. At 6:45 a.m., the substation's front door opened and a woman in civilian clothes entered the lobby, mid-40s, white, carrying a leather briefcase and a paper coffee cup. She showed credentials to Hargrove and identified herself as a representative from the county public defender's office, checking on overnight bookings. Routine. The kind of visit that happened often enough to be unremarkable. Hargrove checked her ID, noted her name, ran it through the system. She was who she said she was, a public defender doing early morning rounds. But something about the timing made Hargrove's instincts fire. 6:45 a.m. on a Saturday was early for routine checks. Public defenders, in his experience, did not arrive before 7 unless someone had called them. "Any new bookings overnight?" she asked, scanning the intake log. Hargrove turned toward her. 3 DUI in cell 1, 2 in cell 3, public intoxication and a domestic, and a traffic stop arrest in cell 2. Cell 2, what are the charges? Obstruction and possession. She made a note. Has he been arraigned? No. Phone call? Hargrove paused. The pause lasted 1.3 seconds. Long enough to be noticed, short enough to be denied. Processing was delayed. Sergeant Langston handled intake. The public defender looked at him. Her eyes carried the particular sharpness of a woman who had spent 15 years navigating a system that processed human beings like inventory and had developed the ability to detect irregularity the way a mechanic detects engine knock, by the sound of something not quite right. I'd like to see the detainee in cell 2. I'll need to log the visit. Of course. Hargrove logged it. Time, 6:48 a.m. Visitor, County PD office. Purpose, welfare check. He escorted her to the corridor, unlocked the holding area door, and stood at a respectful distance while she walked to cell 2. Malik looked up. The woman he had never seen before stood outside his cell with a briefcase and an expression that communicated professional concern without personal investment. "Mr. Drayton? I'm from the public defender's office. Are you injured?" "I'm fine." "Have you been offered a phone call?" "No." "Food? Water?" "Water was provided about an hour ago. No food." She made notes. Quick, precise shorthand on a legal pad. "When were you arrested?" "Approximately 6:50 p.m. yesterday." "That's nearly 12 hours without arraignment or communication access." She looked at Hargrove, who stood at the corridor entrance with the expression of a man trying very hard to be invisible. "Sergeant, is there a reason this detainee has been held 12 hours without a phone call?" "I came on shift at 5:45. The situation was already in progress when I arrived." The diplomatic language of a man covering his own position while declining to cover anyone else's. The public defender recognized the maneuver. She did not press further. Pressing Hargrove would alienate the one person in this building who appeared willing to cooperate, and she was experienced enough to know that allies inside institutions were more valuable than confrontations. "Mr. Drayton, I'm going to make a note of the timeline discrepancies. You're entitled to an attorney and a phone call. If those haven't been provided by 8 a.m., I'll escalate." She left. Hargrove relocked the corridor door behind her. The visit had lasted 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, the first external documentation of Malik's detention conditions had been created, not by his own attorney, not by Zora, not by the FBI, but by a county public defender doing routine Saturday rounds who had noticed that 12 hours without a phone call was not routine by any definition. Small cracks, the kind that buildings survive individually, but that, when they multiply, compromise foundations. Outside, the Savannah morning was building itself from humidity and light. 6:30 a.m. The sun had not yet cleared the tree line, but the sky was brightening in gradients of pink and gold that made the substation's concrete architecture look even more brutalist by contrast. The parking lot was quiet. The building was quiet. The holding corridor was quiet. But somewhere in Atlanta, a woman named Zora Kaine was not quiet. She was awake, and she was moving, and the machinery she was about to set in motion would arrive at this substation in approximately 2 hours with the force of something that could not be stopped by door codes or badge numbers, or the 22-year career of a man who had made the catastrophic mistake of calling the wrong person boy. Zora had been awake since midnight. The check-in protocol was simple: a single encrypted text every 4 hours, rotating codes, no exceptions. The 6 p.m. check-in had arrived on schedule. A single word, Jasper, meaning all clear, no issues, proceeding as planned. The 10 p.m. check-in had not arrived. At 10:15, Zora had sent the prompt, a question mark, nothing more. No response. At 10:30, she sent the secondary prompt, a phrase from a prearranged list that changed weekly. No response. At 11, she began making calls. Not panicked calls. Zora did not panic. Panic was an indulgence she had trained out of herself during law school at Howard, where she had learned that the legal system punished emotion and rewarded preparation, and during the 6 years since, when she had built and managed the legal architecture that kept Malik Drayton's empire operational across 4 states. She made calculated calls that activated protocols designed for exactly this scenario. The scenario where the man at the center of everything went dark and the infrastructure around him had to function without him. Her first call was to a private investigator in Savannah who maintained a database of police scanner traffic. Within 30 minutes, she had a transcript of Redmond's original dispatch call, the supervisor request, and the arrest confirmation. She had a badge number, 4217, and a location, Abercorn Street near 12 Oaks. Her second call was to Malik's GPS tracking service, the real phone, not the decoy. Last ping, Abercorn Street, 6:44 p.m. Then silence. The phone was either destroyed, powered off, or in a location that blocked signal. Given the arrest confirmation on the scanner, the most likely scenario was that the phone remained in the vehicle and the vehicle had been towed or left at the scene. Her third call, at 12:45 a.m., was to Deshaun Okafor, the Savannah civil rights attorney, whose number was stored in a separate encrypted contact list labeled Emergency Southeast. Okafor answered on the 4th ring with the alert weariness of a lawyer who expected middle-of-the-night calls and resented them anyway. Her fourth call, at 1:15 a.m., was to SSA Colton Burris, FBI Civil Rights Division. That call changed everything. The phone on Malik's wall ring, the one cuffed to his wrist, vibrated against the metal. Not his phone. The wall itself, a resonance traveling through the concrete from somewhere deeper in the building. A vibration that felt like a countdown. Malik closed his eyes, counted breaths, waited. He had been waiting his entire life for rooms like this to reveal what they actually were. Not systems of justice, systems of power. And power, unlike justice, could be taken from the people who wielded it by anyone who understood its architecture well enough to dismantle it from the inside. He understood the architecture. He had been building one of his own since he was 19 years old, and his was bigger. The morning light crept down the corridor wall in a thin line, the first natural light Malik had seen in 14 hours. It moved slowly, the way all real things move, not with the urgency of the artificial, but with the patience of something that had been doing this for billions of years and would continue long after the men in this building and their badges and their fabricated reports had been forgotten. The line of light reached the cell floor, touched the edge of Malik's shoe. He opened his eyes. Somewhere outside, a car door closed. Then another. Then a third. 3 doors, 3 vehicles, arriving simultaneously. Not coincidence. Coordination. Malik sat up straighter. The cuff chain clinked against the wall ring. The sound was small, metallic, the kind of sound that meant nothing to anyone except the person making it. To Malik, it sounded like the first note of something that had been building for 14 hours and was about to become very, very loud. He did not smile. Smiling was for people who had the luxury of expressing satisfaction before the work was finished. And the work was not finished. It was just beginning. But the balance was about to shift. The weight that had been accumulating, every boy, every fabricated report, every planted pill, every hour without a phone call, every slap in a camera-blind corridor, was about to land on the other side of the scale. And when it landed, this building, and everyone who had participated in what happened inside it, would discover what Malik Drayton had known since the moment the handcuffs closed around his wrists on the shoulder of Abercorn Street. That some men sit in cells not because they have been captured, but because they are waiting for the right moment to show exactly how free they have been all along. The footsteps were coming, 3 sets, moving in unison, getting louder, and Captain Voss Grady, who was at this moment driving toward the substation in his civilian clothes, with a coffee in one hand and the comfortable certainty that Monday's arraignment would bury another problem beneath paperwork and judicial favors, had no idea that Monday would never come, that his badge was already gone, that the man he had slapped in a camera-blind corridor had a name that appeared in a sealed federal file stored in a vault he did not have clearance to know existed. The footsteps reached the front door. The buzzer sounded. And everything that Voss Grady believed about power, about authority, about who mattered and who did not, was about to be proven catastrophically, irreversibly, permanently wrong. The buzzer sounded twice, then a third time, longer, insistent, the sound of someone who was not asking permission. Desk Sergeant Hargrove looked at the lobby monitor. 3 black SUVs in a V formation across the parking lot. Federal plates, tinted windows reflecting the early Saturday sun in panels of blinding white. Behind them, a silver Mercedes sedan parked at an angle that suggested its driver had stopped caring about lines or courtesy approximately 3 hours ago. Doors opened simultaneously, not sequentially, simultaneously. The coordination of people who had rehearsed arrivals the way musicians rehearsed overtures. Dark suits emerged from the SUV's windbreakers, with 3 yellow letters across the back that Hargrove could read from 50 feet through reinforced glass. FBI. From the Mercedes, 2 figures. A woman in a tailored charcoal suit, carrying a leather portfolio the size of a small briefcase. Beside her, a man in a dark blazer holding a file folder and wearing the particular expression of an attorney who had been awake since 1 a.m. and intended to make someone pay for it. Hargrove's hand moved to the door release. He pressed it before anyone asked. The lock clicked. The glass door swung inward, and the temperature in the Chatham County substation lobby dropped by what felt like 15 degrees. The lead agent entered first. Tall, composed, badge wallet open in his left hand, credentials catching the fluorescent light. His movements carried the economy of a man who had done this hundreds of times and found the repetition useful rather than tedious. SSA Colton Burris, FBI Civil Rights Division. The voice was level, professional, and carried absolutely no warmth. Federal warrant for the immediate release of Malik Drayton and seizure of all documentation, footage, and physical evidence related to his detention. Who's in charge of this facility? Hargrove did not hesitate. Captain Grady is the commanding officer. He's not on site yet. I'm the senior officer present. Then you're receiving service. Burris placed the first document on the booking counter. Release order. Your detainee in cell 2, immediately. He placed a second document beside it. Seizure warrant. All body camera footage from this unit for the past 18 months. Specifically, footage from incidents listed in Attachment A. 23 files your department reported as lost or corrupted. A third document. Preservation order. All booking records, radio logs, property inventory documentation, and internal communications related to the arrest of Malik Drayton on October 11th. The documents sat on the counter in a row, 3 white rectangles on scarred formica, each one carrying the weight of a federal judiciary that did not care about county politics or captain's prerogatives or the 22-year career of a man who had not yet arrived to defend it. Hargrove picked up the first document, read it. His face remained carefully neutral, the expression of a man who had been expecting this since 5:45 a.m. and had spent the intervening hours positioning himself on the correct side of the line that was about to be drawn through his precinct. I'll process the release now. Before you do, Burris opened a folder he had carried under his arm. I want to walk through the documentation discrepancies we've identified overnight, for the record and for your desk sergeant's awareness. He placed 3 printouts on the counter, each one a receipt, evidence authenticated with timestamps and source codes that transformed institutional failure into admissible documentation. First, body camera footage. Officer Redmond's unit BC-4217 logged activation at 6:41 p.m. via its automatic buffer. The booking intake log shows arrival at 7:22 p.m. GPS transit time from the stop location to this substation is 12 minutes. That leaves 29 minutes of a detained citizen's custody unaccounted for in any official report. 29 minutes where the detainee was in the back of a patrol vehicle and the officer chose not to activate recording. He set the page aside, picked up the second. Second, property inventory. The initial field pat-down report, completed by Officer Redmond at 6:51 p.m., lists wallet, mobile phone, vehicle keys, rental agreement folder, no controlled substances. The property intake log, completed by Corporal Wick at 7:38 p.m., lists the same items, plus one clear baggie containing 12 white pills. The pills materialized 47 minutes after a search that did not find them. And the booking desk camera, the secondary ceiling unit, not the primary counter unit, captured Corporal Wick stepping behind the property partition for 11 seconds immediately before discovering the pills. Third page. Third, radio traffic, Chatham County Dispatch Log, Channel 4, 9:14 p.m. Captain Grady to dispatch, quote, "Subject in holding Drayton Malik. No outside communication until I authorize. My call." End quote. No legal basis cited. No supervisory review requested. A unilateral order to deny a detained citizen his constitutional right to communication, issued by the same officer who conducted the arrest, which, I'll note, is an additional conflict of interest violation under your department's own custody protocols. Hargrove studied the printouts. His expression, the carefully maintained neutrality of a 30-year survivor, cracked slightly at the edges. Not surprise. Something closer to confirmation. The look of a man whose suspicions had just been converted from instinct to evidence. "I'll process the release now," he repeated. This time the words carried weight. Not compliance. Decision. The decision of a man who understood that the next 30 minutes would determine whether his 30-year career ended in the same wreckage as his captain's, or whether the email he had sent at 6:15 a.m., the one with 3 attachments to a non-departmental address, would serve as the documentation of a man who had chosen correctly when choosing was difficult. "Thank you, Sergeant." Burris turned to the agents flanking him. "Secure the evidence room. Nothing leaves this building." 2 agents moved down the corridor with the quiet efficiency of people who knew exactly where they were going because they had studied the building's floor plan before arriving. Hargrove watched them pass the booking desk, turn left toward the evidence storage area, and disappear. He did not try to stop them, did not call for backup, did not do any of the things that a loyal subordinate of Voss Grady might have been expected to do, because Earl Hargrove had spent 30 years learning the difference between loyalty to a person and loyalty to a system. And he had chosen the system approximately 3 hours ago when he activated the backup recording device and sent the email with 3 attachments to an address that was not a department account. The woman in the charcoal suit entered the lobby 6 seconds after Burris. She did not introduce herself to anyone, did not show credentials, did not announce her purpose or her authority. She walked directly to the booking counter, set the leather portfolio on the surface, and opened it with the deliberate slowness of someone who wanted every eye in the room to track her movements. "I need to see my client," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried the particular frequency of authority that exists independent of volume, the authority of someone who was accustomed to being obeyed not because she demanded it, but because the consequences of disobedience were understood by everyone in the room without being stated. Hargrove looked at her. "And you are?" "Zora Kaine, General Counsel for Drayton Holdings, LLC. She paused. Let the company name settle into the air the way a stone settles into water, with rings that expanded outward in every direction, which, among other assets, holds the commercial lease on the building at 1422 Montgomery Street. The address meant nothing to Hargrove. It would mean everything to Grady. Beside her, the man in the dark blazer spoke for the first time. Deshaun Okafor, civil rights attorney. I filed an emergency habeas corpus petition with Judge Peralta at 6:15 this morning. The petition was granted 40 minutes ago. Your detainee is to be released immediately, and I'll need certified copies of every document generated during his detention for the federal civil rights complaint we're filing on Monday. Hargrove nodded, picked up his keys, walked toward the holding corridor without argument, without delay, without the bureaucratic friction that Langston had weaponized 12 hours earlier. The door beeped. The corridor opened. Hargrove's footsteps echoed down the concrete toward cell 2. Behind him, in the lobby, Zora Kaine spread the contents of the leather portfolio across the booking counter. Documents, printouts, financial filings, a photograph. Malik Drayton in a suit, standing at a podium, the background suggesting a conference room in a building that cost more than the entire substation and every vehicle in its parking lot combined. The photograph was not necessary for any legal purpose. It was there to ensure that when Grady arrived, and he would arrive because Hargrove had already called him, the first thing he saw was the face of the man he had called boy, wearing clothes and occupying a context that demolished every assumption Grady had made on the shoulder of Abercorn Street. The moment Captain Grady walks through that door, everything he believed about who holds power in this building is about to be permanently, catastrophically reversed. Do not look away. At 8:26 a.m., a black Tahoe pulled into the substation parking lot and stopped at an angle that suggested its driver had seen the federal vehicles and had considered, for approximately 2 seconds, turning around. The engine idled. Through the tinted windshield, Voss Grady's face was visible. Or rather, the process happening on his face was visible. The rapid cycling through confusion, concern, calculation, and the particular blankness that descends when a man's brain encounters information it is not equipped to process. He got out, straightened his polo shirt, adjusted the civilian belt that did not hold a badge or a weapon, because he had not planned to need either on a Saturday morning when his only agenda was paperwork and the quiet management of a detainee who was supposed to be no one. He walked toward the front entrance, pushed through the glass door, stopped. The lobby was not his lobby anymore. It belonged to the FBI windbreakers, moving through it with the proprietary confidence of new ownership. It belonged to Zora Kaine, who stood at the booking counter surrounded by documents that Grady could not read from this distance, but that radiated the particular menace of information organized for a purpose. It belonged to S.S.A. Burris, who turned at the sound of the door and regarded Grady with the flat attention of a predator who had been waiting for the last piece of prey to arrive. "Captain Grady." Burris's voice carried across the lobby. Every head in the room turned. "We need to talk." Grady's eyes swept the room, cataloging, counting agents. 6 that he could see, probably more in the corridors. Counting exits. Front door behind him. Side corridor to his left. Rear entrance down the hall. The instincts of a man who had spent 22 years as law enforcement suddenly operating from the other side of the encounter. "What is this?" His voice aimed for authority and landed somewhere closer to confusion. "This is my station. What are you doing in my station?" "Serving federal warrants." Burris stepped forward, closed the distance between them to 8 feet. Close enough for conversation, far enough for formality. "Your officers arrested a man last night without probable cause, fabricated evidence to justify the detention, denied him constitutionally required communication access for 14 hours, and physically assaulted him in a camera-blind corridor. I'm here to address all of that." The list of violations landed like individual punches, each one a blow to the institutional armor that Grady had spent 2 decades constructing. His face cycled through denial, anger, and the first pale shadow of fear. Those are allegations. Unsubstantiated. They're documented." Burris cut him off, not rudely, with the surgical efficiency of a man who did not have time for denial and was not going to wait for it to run its course. Body camera footage from Officer Redmond's unit recovered from your backup server by our digital forensics team. Booking desk camera footage showing your corporal planting evidence in the detainee's property. Radio traffic logs showing you personally ordered communication access denied without legal basis. And a secondary recording device in the holding corridor that captured audio of an unauthorized cell entry at approximately 2:15 a.m. The last item hit Grady differently than the others. The corridor, the cell, 2:15 a.m., the slap, the threat, the speech about judges and DAs and the absence of oversight. All of it captured by a device he did not know existed, in a corridor he believed was blind, during a conversation he had conducted, because he was certain no one was listening. The color left his face in stages, cheeks first, then forehead, then the lips that had spoken the word boy 3 times in 14 hours. "Where is the detainee?" Grady asked. The question was a pivot, an attempt to regain procedural footing by focusing on logistics rather than culpability. The attempt failed. "Being released," Burris said, "by your desk sergeant, who has been more cooperative than anyone else in this building." Grady looked past Burris toward the corridor. "I want to see the booking records before anything—" "You don't have access to anything in this building anymore, Captain. Your involvement in the detainee's arrest makes you a subject of the investigation, not a participant in its resolution." "Subject?" The word hit Grady like a second slap. The institutional kind, the kind that left marks on careers instead of cheekbones. "I'm a 22-year officer. I have rights. I have a union." "You have an attorney." Burris's voice did not waver. "I'd recommend calling one." The union's representative reviewed preliminary evidence at 6 a.m. this morning and, as I understand it, expressed reservations about the scope of representation he could offer given the federal nature of the charges. The union was stepping back. The realization crossed Grady's face like weather, a cloud passing over terrain that had been sunlit for 2 decades and was discovering for the first time what shadow felt like. The police union was the fortress that every officer counted on when the system turned against them. The union paid for attorneys. The union organized public support. The union applied political pressure to mayors and council members and prosecutors who threatened its members. But the union also made calculations, and the calculation it had made at 6 a.m. After reviewing body cam footage, booking camera footage, corridor audio, and a sealed federal cooperation agreement, was that Voss Grady was a liability that exceeded the union's capacity for protection. Redmond, who had been standing near the corridor entrance trying to make himself small, a difficult task for a 260-pound man, shifted his weight. His body camera, which had not been activated during the traffic stop or the transport or the cell transfer corridor, was now blinking red. Someone had turned it on. Whether Redmond had activated it himself or whether an FBI agent had reached over and pressed the button during the lobby's transformation was unclear. The effect was the same. Every word spoken in this room was now being recorded, and Redmond's sudden awareness of that fact was visible in the rigid set of his shoulders and the way his eyes tracked every agent's movement with the hypervigilance of a man who had realized that the predator-prey dynamic he had always enjoyed was operating in reverse. "Officer Redmond," Burris said, turning, "you'll need to provide a statement regarding the traffic stop and transport of Mr. Drayton. Your body camera footage from last night, the footage you claim was not activated, has been recovered from the automatic 30-second buffer your department camera maintains, even when the record function is off. We have the first 30 seconds of the traffic stop. It includes your approach, the initial contact, and Captain Grady's arrival." Redmond's jaw clenched. The 30-second buffer. A technical feature buried in the camera's operating manual that most officers either did not know about or forgot about, because the buffer's purpose was precisely this: to capture the opening moments of encounters that officers chose not to record. It was an institutional safeguard designed by engineers who understood that the people wearing the cameras would sometimes have reasons to keep them off, and that those reasons were exactly the reasons the cameras needed to be on. "I want my union rep present before I give any statement," Redmond said. His voice was smaller than it had been in the corridor. The voice of a large man who had discovered that size was not a relevant variable in his current situation. "That's your right. Agent Torres will coordinate scheduling, but the footage exists regardless of your statement." Down the corridor, the holding cell door opened with the metallic screech that Malik had heard 14 hours earlier from the other side. Hargrove unlocked the wall-mounted cuff. The metal fell away from Malik's wrist, and the absence of its weight was louder than its presence had been. A silence where pressure used to live. Malik stood, rolled his right shoulder, the one that had met the doorframe, the one that had absorbed Redmond's compliance hold, the one that carried 14 hours of concrete bench and awkward angles. He followed Hargrove down the corridor, around the two turns, past the empty camera mounts, through the booking area door, and into the lobby. The lobby had transformed. FBI windbreakers, federal documents, the smell of authority that did not belong to Chatham County and did not answer to its captain. And at the booking counter, a woman in a charcoal suit who looked at Malik with the particular expression of someone who had been awake for 30 hours and was not going to rest until every person responsible for those 30 hours understood exactly what it had cost. Zora did not speak. Not yet. She looked at Malik, at the bruise forming on his left cheekbone where Grady's palm had landed, at the red marks on his wrists where the cuffs had bitten, at the hoodie with the stretched collar where Redmond had yanked it. She catalogued each mark the way Malik had catalogued each violation, silently, precisely, with the comprehensive attention of someone who would ensure that nothing was forgotten and nothing was forgiven. Malik walked to the counter, stood beside Zora, faced Grady across 12 feet of formica and the wreckage of a career that was ending in real time. Burris reached into his jacket, removed a sealed federal envelope, cream-colored, embossed with the Department of Justice seal, the kind of envelope that does not contain good news for the person it is presented to. He broke the seal, removed a document, held it so that Grady could see the header. "This is a sealed cooperation agreement between the United States Department of Justice and Malik Drayton. Case file CR-2023-1147. Mr. Drayton is an active federal informant under protected witness classification. His cooperation is material to an ongoing investigation that I am not authorized to discuss in this setting. Unauthorized interference with his liberty or safety constitutes obstruction of federal proceedings under 18 U.S.C. Section 1512 and deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Burris paused. Let the statute numbers settle. Let the implications expand. The man you held overnight, the man your officers planted evidence on, denied phone access, falsified reports about, and physically assaulted, is a protected federal cooperator. His arrest triggered an automatic review of this facility, and what we found in that review is why I brought warrants instead of a phone call. Grady stared at the document, at the DOJ seal, at the name, Malik Drayton, printed in a typeface that federal courts used for documents that altered the trajectories of lives and institutions. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. I didn't... The sentence had no ending. What could follow? I didn't know? That was the point. I didn't mean to? The body cam footage said otherwise. I didn't have a choice? He had made every choice. Every escalation, every violation, every utterance of the word that reduced a man to something less than what he was. Zora spoke for the first time since requesting to see her client. Her voice was quiet, controlled, the vocal equivalent of a scalpel. Captain Grady, I'm General Counsel for Drayton Holdings, LLC. I have something that might provide useful context for your situation. She turned a page in the portfolio. A corporate filing. Delaware registration. The name Drayton Holdings, LLC, in bold type at the top. Below it, a list of subsidiary holdings. Drayton Holdings maintains 14 commercial properties across Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. 3 nightclub entertainment venues. A political action committee. Civic Future PAC. She turned another page. This one was a list. Names. Dates. Dollar amounts. Civic Future PAC donated to the campaigns of Chatham County Commissioners Hayes, Villanueva, and Odom, combined contributions totaling $112,000 across the last 2 election cycles. She paused, looked at Grady. Those are the same 3 commissioners who voted to appoint you to your current position, in case the connection isn't immediately clear. She turned one more page, a lease agreement, the address at the top, 1422 Montgomery Street, Savannah, Georgia. The tenant, Grady and Associates Insurance Brokerage, LLC. The landlord, Drayton Holdings, LLC. Monthly rent, $3,200. Lease term, 60 months, current through 2026. Your wife's insurance office, Zora said, has been paying rent to my client for the past 4 years. The lease is current. I mention this only for context. The silence that followed was not silence. It was the sound of a man's understanding of his own position collapsing, the internal architecture of certainty crumbling under the weight of information that could not be denied, deflected, or destroyed. Grady's eyes moved from the lease agreement to Malik's face. From the face of the man he had called boy to the documents that revealed exactly who that man was. Not a drifter in a hoodie, not a vagrant in a rental car, not a nobody who could be processed and discarded and forgotten by Monday morning. A man who owned things, who funded campaigns, who held leases, who had the resources to hire the kind of legal representation that did not arrive in this building on Saturday mornings unless the situation required total, unrecoverable destruction. Grady's coffee cup, the one he had carried in from the Tahoe, the one he had been holding since the parking lot, slipped from his hand. The ceramic shattered on the floor. Brown liquid spread across the tile in a pattern that no one moved to clean. The sound of the breaking cup was small, contained, almost delicate, the sound of something fragile encountering a surface harder than itself. No one moved to clean it. Burris stepped forward. Corporal Wick. The name carried down the corridor like a summons. Jensen Wick, who had been standing near the evidence room entrance watching the FBI agents inventory his filing system, turned. His face was pale. He had heard enough of the lobby conversation through the open doorway to understand that the situation had moved beyond anything he could manage with cleverness or denial. Jensen Wick, you're under arrest for evidence tampering under 18 U.S.C. Section 1519 and deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. 2 agents flanked him. Wick's hands shook as they were guided behind his back. The handcuffs, the same model of handcuffs that had been on Malik's wrists 14 hours earlier, closed with the same sound. Click, click. The symmetry was precise enough to be poetic, though no one in the room was in the mood for poetry. Wick was cuffed at his own booking counter, processed on the same forms he had used to process hundreds of others. His personal effects, phone, wallet, keys, the pen he clicked compulsively, were inventoried and sealed in a federal evidence bag. The booking camera recorded everything with the same indifference it had shown when Wick planted the pills. The red light blinked. Steady. Patient. Langston, who had arrived for her Saturday shift 4 minutes before the FBI, stood near the corridor entrance in the particular posture of a person trying to determine whether standing still would make her invisible. It would not. Burris had her name, had the booking log showing the 11-hour communication delay, had the timestamps from her 3 absences during processing, the coffee, the corridor conversation, the bathroom, each one documented by the camera she had assumed was her tool and that had turned out to be her witness. She caught Wick's eye as the agents walked him past her toward the processing area. His face was the color of paper. His mouth moved, forming a word, a name, something that never became audible because the agent guiding his elbow increased pressure slightly, and the thought died before it became speech. Langston looked away. The instinct was immediate, automatic, the social calculation of a woman who understood that association was a form of evidence and that being seen looking at a man in federal handcuffs was not a visual she wanted attached to her name. Henshaw was not in the building. He had called in sick at 7:30 a.m., 90 minutes before the FBI arrived, 45 minutes after Hargrove's shift change, a timeline that suggested someone had warned him. Burris made a note. The warning itself was a potential obstruction charge if the source could be identified. The source, for the moment, could not be. But the FBI's interest in departmental phone records, which the warrant authorized in full, would eventually produce the call log that connected Henshaw's sick day to a 3-minute conversation with a number registered to a prepaid phone purchased at a convenience store. The pattern of prepaid phones and convenient timing was becoming a theme. "Captain Grady," Burris turned back. His voice carried finality. "You're suspended from duty effective immediately, pending internal affairs review and federal grand jury proceedings. I'll need your badge and service weapon." "You can't." "I can. The warrant authorizes it. Your department's own use of force policies authorize it when an officer is the subject of a federal criminal referral. Badge, weapon, now." Grady's hand moved to his belt. The gesture was automatic, reaching for a weapon that was not there because he had come to work in civilian clothes on a Saturday morning when he expected nothing more challenging than paperwork and the quiet humiliation of a man in a holding cell. "I'm not carrying today." "Then the badge." Grady reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around the shield that had lived there for 22 years. The weight of it so familiar that its absence would feel like a phantom limb. He drew it out, set it on the counter. The metal landed on the lease agreement, Drayton Holdings, LLC. The badge resting on the document that connected his wife's livelihood to the man he had arrested. A small geographic coincidence on a Formica counter, a devastating one. "Your attorney can contact the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Georgia to discuss proceedings. Grand jury referral has been filed. I'd recommend retaining private counsel rather than relying on the police union, given the nature of the charges." Burris delivered this information without satisfaction, without anger, without any of the emotional content that the moment seemed to demand. He was a federal agent executing a federal process. The process did not require his feelings. It required his precision. And his precision was flawless. Burris turned to the nearest agent. "Status on the digital forensics?" Agent Torres, compact, focused, the kind of person who communicated in data rather than drama, looked up from a tablet. "Server image complete. We've confirmed 23 body camera files flagged as corrupted in departmental records. All 23 have been recovered from the backup partition. Deletion metadata traces to a single user account, CPT_Grady_1103. Deletion timestamps correspond to dates of formal complaints filed by Black residents between January and September of this year." She swiped through the tablet. 7 complaints. 7 deletion events. Each deletion occurred within 48 hours of the corresponding complaint being filed. The correlation is 100%. The information landed on the lobby like an additional weight dropped onto a structure already buckling. 7 complaints. 7 deleted videos. Each deletion timed to coincide with the administrative processing of the complaint, ensuring that by the time the complaint reached internal review, Grady's internal review, the footage that would have substantiated it was gone. This was not a single bad arrest. This was a system, a methodology, a repeating pattern of evidence destruction designed to insulate one man's authority from accountability, executed with the consistency of a protocol and the arrogance of someone who believed that deleted files were deleted forever. They were not. The backup server, an automated redundancy installed during a technology upgrade that Grady had approved without reading the specifications, had preserved copies of every file that Grady had manually removed from the primary system. The server had been doing its job for 3 years, quietly, obediently, building an archive that Grady did not know existed and that the FBI had accessed with a single warrant and 16 hours of forensic work. Technology, unlike institutions, did not protect the people who operated it. Technology preserved information with the mechanical indifference of a process that had no loyalty, no politics, and no interest in who benefited and who suffered from the truth. Grady stood in the lobby of his own station, the station he had controlled for 7 years, the station where his word was law, and his decisions were final, and his authority was absolute, and watched it become someone else's jurisdiction. The FBI agents moved through it with proprietary confidence, opening cabinets, imaging hard drives, cataloging records. His officers, the overnight crew, the morning crew arriving for Saturday shift, stood in clusters, uncertain, watching the transfer of power happen in real time without understanding how it had happened so fast. It had not happened fast. It had been happening for 14 months. The sealed cooperation agreement, the DOJ investigation, the digital forensic recovery of deleted body cam footage, the pattern or practice research, the 47 complaints from black residents that Grady had processed through his own review system and found each time to be unfounded. And all of it building, accumulating, compressing under institutional weight until the pressure needed only one more violation, one more arrest, one more fabricated charge, one more utterance of a word that reduced a human being to something less, to trigger the release. Grady had provided that trigger, had volunteered it, had walked onto Abercorn Street and handed the FBI the final piece of evidence they needed by doing what he had always done, by treating a black man as less than a man, by assuming that the hoodie and the rental car and the skin color told him everything he needed to know, by operating with the unexamined certainty that his power was permanent and his judgment was sound, and the man he was arresting was no one. The man he was arresting was not no one. The man he was arresting was everyone he had ever underestimated, concentrated into a single individual who had the resources, the patience, and the institutional backing to make the consequences real. At 9:14 a.m., Malik Drayton walked out of the Chatham County substation and into a Savannah morning that smelled like salt and magnolia and the particular freshness that follows institutional collapse. The sun was fully up now, burning the overnight humidity off the parking lot in wisps of steam that rose from the asphalt like the building was exhaling. He paused on the front step. The daylight hit his face, and for the first time in 14 hours, he felt warmth that was not generated by fluorescent tubes or institutional radiators or the friction of a man's palm against his cheekbone. Real warmth. Solar. Indifferent to the politics of the building behind him. The sun shone on precinct and prisoner with equal disinterest, and there was something in that equality, something small and unremarkable and profoundly necessary, that Malik allowed himself to feel for exactly 3 seconds before the discipline reasserted itself and the processing resumed. His legs were stiff. 14 hours on a concrete bench with limited range of motion had compressed the muscles in his hips and lower back into something that functioned, but protested. Each step down the front stairs sent a small complaint through his knees. The complaints were manageable. He had managed worse. But they were present, and their presence was a reminder that institutional power, even when it fails, leaves traces on the bodies it touches. Zora walked beside him. Neither spoke for a full block. Their footsteps on the sidewalk were the only sound, steady, synchronized, the rhythm of two people who had worked together long enough to move in concert without negotiation. Malik stopped at the corner of Montgomery and Broughton, looked back at the substation. From this distance it looked small, a squat concrete box surrounded by federal vehicles and the slow-motion disassembly of a captain's career. The FBI agents were carrying boxes through the front door now. Evidence boxes, record boxes. The accumulated documentation of a precinct that had believed its documentation was for its own use, and was discovering that documentation serves whoever controls it. "You could have activated the watch," Zora said. Her voice was flat. Not angry, something beyond anger, something that lived in the territory where concern had been compressed by 14 hours of fear and operational discipline into a substance harder and denser than either emotion alone. "The panic function has a 3-second trigger. You were cuffed, not paralyzed. You chose not to use it. I chose to let them build the case for me. You chose to sit in a concrete cell for 14 hours while a man with a badge called you boy and slapped you." Malik turned from the substation to face her. The bruise on his left cheekbone was darkening. purples and yellows spreading under brown skin like a map of the previous night's geography of violence. His wrists bore red lines where the cuffs had dug. His right shoulder sat slightly lower than his left. The doorframe impact, the compliance hold, the accumulated strain of hours spent cuffed to a wall. 14 hours of their mistakes is worth more than 14 minutes of my comfort. Every violation is documented. Every charge is federal. Every hour they held me without a phone call is a count on the indictment. Zora did not argue. She had known Malik for 6 years, since the day he walked into her office in Atlanta, 22 years old, carrying a duffel bag and a business plan written in a composition notebook, and the particular calm of someone who had already survived things that would have broken people twice his age. She had watched him build the empire from a single nightclub in College Park to a network that spanned 4 states, had watched him develop the discipline to wear thrift store hoodies and drive rental cars, while his competitors announced themselves with jewelry and motorcades, had watched him learn, through trial and error and the occasional catastrophe, that visibility was vulnerability and anonymity was armor. She knew he calculated cost the way mathematicians calculated proofs, with rigor, with patience, with the willingness to accept intermediate suffering in service of a final result that justified the pain. She knew that what appeared to be passivity was strategy, that what appeared to be endurance was weaponized patience. She knew all of this, and she was still angry, because knowing the strategy did not erase the bruise, did not undo the slap, did not restore the 14 hours that had been taken from a man whose time was worth more per hour than most people's annual salary, not because of the money, but because of the life that each hour represented. Time spent in a concrete cell was time not spent building, planning, protecting the network of people and interests that depended on Malik Drayton being free and functional and unbroken. "The watch stays," she said. It was not a request. "Next time, you use it." Malik nodded. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. The distinction was subtle, and Zora recognized it, and the recognition produced a silence between them that communicated more than any argument could have. They walked to the Mercedes. Okafor was already in the passenger seat, phone to his ear, filing the civil rights complaint with the kind of focused urgency that emergency petition attorneys developed the way firefighters developed speed, through repetition and the knowledge that delay had consequences. Malik sat in the back seat, closed his eyes. The leather was cool against his bruised cheek. The car smelled like Zora's perfume, citrus and sandalwood, the olfactory signature of a woman who managed a criminal empire's legal architecture and somehow still found time to apply fragrance at 4 a.m. before driving 3 hours to a county substation. For the first time in 14 hours, Malik's shoulders dropped. Not surrender. Release. The controlled decompression of a body that had been holding tension at operational levels for an entire night and was finally, in the privacy of a vehicle that belonged to his world rather than Grady's, allowing itself to feel the weight of what it had carried. His cheek throbbed. His wrists ached. His shoulder burned with the deep structural pain of tissue that had been compressed and twisted and strained beyond its design tolerance. These were the costs. The line items on the ledger of justice that no spreadsheet ever captured. The physical price paid by the human body when institutional power decided to make an example and chose the wrong person. What Grady thought was an ordinary Friday night arrest just cost him his badge, his career, and possibly his freedom. But the story doesn't end with his suspension, because the real question hasn't been answered yet. Stay until the very end. Zora started the engine, pulled out of the parking space. The substation shrank in the rearview mirror, smaller with each block, less significant with each turn, until it disappeared entirely behind the Spanish moss and live oaks of a city that would spend the next 6 months pretending to be surprised by what had been happening inside its institutions. The administrative hearing convened 6 weeks later. November 22nd, Chatham County Government Complex, 4th floor, Hearing Room C, a space designed for zoning disputes and budget reviews that had been repurposed for the institutional reckoning that no one in county government had anticipated, and everyone in county government was now scrambling to manage. The panel consisted of 3 members: Deputy County Manager Rosa Whitfield, a career administrator who had survived 4 county managers by mastering the art of procedural neutrality; independent monitor; Judge Catherine Yates, retired, appointed by the Georgia Attorney General's office specifically because she owed nothing to Chatham County politics and had a reputation for following evidence regardless of where it led; and Inspector General Warren Oates, whose role was to ensure that the hearing's procedures met the standards that the county's actual procedures had so catastrophically failed to meet. Grady's attorney, Marcus Feld, private counsel, retained at considerable expense because the police union's attorney had reviewed the evidence and discovered a family emergency in another state, argued standard operating procedure and officer discretion. The arguments were competent. They were also irrelevant. Standard operating procedure does not include fabricating probable cause, planting evidence, denying constitutionally required communication access, or striking a handcuffed detainee in a surveillance-free corridor. Officer discretion does not extend to calling detained citizens "boy" while exercising the power of the state over their bodies and liberty. The panel reviewed 19 hours of recovered footage, body cam from Redmond's unit, activated by the automatic 30-second pre-buffer that Redmond did not know his camera had, capturing the traffic stop's opening moments despite his failure to manually activate the device; booking desk camera footage showing Wick's 11 seconds behind the partition and the reappearance of pills that had not existed during the initial pat-down; audio from the corridor backup device, low quality, partially obstructed by concrete walls, but clear enough to capture Grady's voice, Grady's threats, and the sound of an open palm connecting with flesh. Cross-examination lasted 2 days. Grady testified that the slap was incidental contact during a routine security check. Feld presented this explanation with a straight face and the professional detachment of a man earning his fee. Judge Yates listened, reviewed the audio 3 times, and asked a single question. "Captain Grady, is it your testimony that the sound captured on this recording at 2:17 a.m. is consistent with incidental contact?" Grady said yes. Judge Yates made a note. Her expression did not change, but the pen moved across the paper with a pressure that suggested the note was more than procedural. The panel deliberated for 8 days. The decision, when it came, was not the thunderclap that the public and the media expected. It was something smaller and, in its way, more damaging. The institutional equivalent of a foundation crack that does not bring a building down immediately, but guarantees that it will never be structurally sound again. Decision: deferred pending grand jury outcome. Captain Grady to remain on paid administrative leave, full salary, benefits intact, until the federal proceedings concluded. The deferral was procedural, not exculpatory. It meant the county was waiting to see whether Grady would be indicted before deciding whether to terminate him. It was cowardice dressed as caution, but it was also, in the grim mathematics of institutional reform, standard. Systems protect themselves first, individuals second, justice third, if at all. The federal machinery moved at its own pace, slower than outrage demanded, faster than institutions preferred. The grand jury convened in January, 3 months after the arrest. SSA Burris presented evidence over 4 days: body cam footage, booking camera footage, corridor audio, the falsified arrest report, the property inventory discrepancy, the radio traffic log showing communication denied without legal authority, the 23 previously deleted body cam files recovered from the backup server and traced to user ID CPT_Grady_1103. Corporal Jensen Wick facing federal evidence tampering charges under 18 U.S.C. Section 1519 and civil rights violations under 18 U.S.C. Section 242 retained a criminal defense attorney named Sloan Prescott, effective, expensive, the kind of lawyer who specialized in officers accused of misconduct and who understood that the best outcomes in federal cases were negotiated rather than litigated. Prescott filed a motion to suppress the booking camera footage, arguing that the secondary ceiling camera's existence had not been disclosed to officers and therefore constituted unauthorized surveillance of law enforcement personnel. The motion was denied. Judge Gertrude Ainsley, U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Georgia, wrote in her ruling, "Law enforcement officers operating in public facilities have no reasonable expectation of privacy while performing official duties. The camera's existence is no more unauthorized than the building's fire alarm." Wick's arraignment was scheduled for February. His attorney entered preliminary plea negotiations. The federal prosecutor, a USA, Danielle Westing, offered a reduced charge in exchange for testimony against Grady regarding the department's systematic deletion of body cam footage. The negotiation was ongoing. Wick had not yet decided whether institutional loyalty or personal survival would win the calculation. The answer, in cases like these, almost always favored survival. But almost always was not always, and the police union's shadow presence in Wick's peripheral vision, the implicit promise of support if he stayed quiet, the implicit threat of abandonment if he didn't, complicated the mathematics. Officer Tate Redmond received a written reprimand for failure to activate his body camera during transport and for excessive physical contact during detainee movement. The reprimand was filed in his personnel record. It would remain there for 3 years, after which departmental policy allowed it to be expunged. Redmond's attorney, provided by the police union, filed a grievance challenging the reprimand on the grounds that transport procedures did not explicitly require the gentle handling standard the reprimand implied. The grievance was pending. Sergeant Priscilla Langston received a written reprimand for booking delay violations and was transferred from the desk to administrative duties, filing, data entry, the institutional equivalent of a closet. She would spend the next 6 months processing the same paperwork she had once wielded as a weapon, except now the paperwork was about her own precinct's failures, and the delays she experienced were not deliberate, but were infuriating nonetheless. Deputy Milo Henshaw was placed on administrative leave for report-writing discrepancies, the institutional euphemism for fabricated arrest narratives. Internal review timeline, 4 to 6 months. Henshaw's attorney argued that the discrepancies were subjective interpretive differences rather than fabrications. The argument was creative. It was also the kind of defense that worked often enough to make the system's critics despair and often enough to make its defenders uncomfortable. The Department of Justice opened a preliminary inquiry into pattern or practice violations at the Chatham County substation. The inquiry was announced through a joint press release from the U.S. Attorney's Office and the DOJ's Civil Rights Division. The press release used phrases like systemic concerns, institutional accountability, and community trust, the vocabulary of reform that committed to nothing specific while communicating that something specific had gone wrong. Consent decree negotiations began in March. The county's legal team, 3 attorneys from an Atlanta firm that specialized in defending municipalities against federal oversight, met with DOJ representatives in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building that none of the officers whose conduct had prompted the negotiations would ever enter. The negotiations would continue for months. The consent decree, if finalized, would require body camera activation protocols, independent complaint review, bias training, and community oversight. Reforms that existed in hundreds of other consent decrees in hundreds of other cities, and that produced results ranging from meaningful to cosmetic, depending on variables that no one could predict in advance. The county commissioners, Hayes, Villanueva, and Odom, the same 3 who had appointed Grady and who had received campaign contributions from Civic Future PAC, issued a joint statement expressing full confidence in the reform process and commitment to transparency and accountability. The statement did not mention Grady by name, did not mention Malik Drayton by name, did not mention the 911 call, the traffic stop, the planted pills, the slap, or the word boy. It existed in the institutional space between acknowledgement and denial, the space where public officials go when the truth is too expensive to admit and too documented to deny. Commissioner Odom, reached by a local journalist outside a Chamber of Commerce luncheon, offered a more candid assessment off the record. Nobody knew. That's the line. We didn't know. The journalist asked whether the contributions from Civic Future PAC had influenced the commissioner's appointment of Grady. Odom's off-the-record candor evaporated. No comment. The local media covered the story for 11 days. Front page, the first 3. Below the fold, the next 4. Brief mentions the final 4. Then newer stories displaced it. A city council budget dispute, a shooting on the south side, the rhythms of local news that treated institutional corruption as an event rather than a condition. National outlets ran the story for 2 cycles, focused primarily on the body cam deletion pattern and the evidence planting footage, then moved on. The footage circulated on social media for longer. A clip of Wick's 11 seconds behind the partition, viewed 47 million times, spawning commentary and analysis, and the particular form of public outrage that burned hot and brief and left no permanent marks on the institutions that had produced it. 43 people contacted the FBI field office in Savannah in the month following Malik's release, reporting encounters with Chatham County officers that mirrored the pattern documented in his case: traffic stops without probable cause, fabricated charges, evidence that appeared during processing but not during initial searches, extended detention without communication access. Agent Torres screened each report. 21 appeared credible at preliminary review. Cross-referencing with departmental records revealed that 14 of the 21 complainants had filed formal complaints through the county's internal system. All 14 complaints had been reviewed by Captain Grady's office. All 14 had been found unfounded. The pattern was no longer a theory. It was a database. 2 officers suspended or arrested, 2 reprimanded, 1 transferred, a federal inquiry with no guaranteed outcome, the system bending, not breaking, never breaking all at once. Shifting, slowly, under pressure that had to be sustained for months or years. Pressure that exhausted the people applying it long before the institution felt genuine discomfort. This is what accountability looked like in practice, not the dramatic, instantaneous justice of fiction, where corrupt officials are led away in handcuffs while crowds cheer and the credits roll, but the slow, grinding, procedurally constrained process of institutional change that required patience measured in fiscal quarters and determination measured in legal filings, and a tolerance for ambiguity that most people did not possess. Malik Drayton possessed it. He had been building things, organizations, networks, systems of influence, since he was 19 years old, and every one of them had required the understanding that construction is slow and destruction is fast, and the difference between the two is sustained attention over time. The civil suit was filed in January. Okafor versus Chatham County, case number 4:2 4-CV-01847-GEA. Plaintiff Malik A. Drayton. Defendants Captain Voss Grady, Officer Tate Redmond, Sergeant Priscilla Langston, Deputy Milo Henshaw, Corporal Jensen Wick, and Chatham County, Georgia. Claims: violations of 42 U.S.C., Section 1983, 4th Amendment, illegal search and seizure, 14th Amendment, equal protection, and state law claims including assault, battery, false imprisonment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The county's insurance carrier, the entity that would ultimately pay any settlement or judgment, immediately began the cost-benefit analysis that insurance carriers perform when the documented evidence is overwhelming and the litigation risks are existential. Settlement discussions began before the first deposition was scheduled. The numbers being discussed were not public, but they were large enough that the county manager had requested a closed-session briefing with the commissioners, and the commissioners had emerged from that briefing looking like people who had just been told the price of something they could not afford but could not avoid paying. Most cases settled. The statistics were unambiguous. 95% of civil rights cases against law enforcement resolved through settlement rather than trial. The settlements included non-disclosure agreements, no admission of wrongdoing clauses, and dollar amounts that were simultaneously too large for taxpayers and too small for justice. This case would probably follow the same trajectory. The evidence was too strong for the county to risk a trial. The political exposure was too great for the commissioners to risk a public judgment. The insurance carrier was too pragmatic to risk a jury that had seen the booking camera footage. Justice, in the American system, was not a verdict. It was a negotiated outcome. and the outcome would be negotiated by attorneys in conference rooms, far from the concrete cell where Malik had sat for 14 hours, far from the corridor where Grady had delivered his threats, far from the Abercorn Street shoulder where a man in a hoodie had been told to step out of his car by someone who called him boy and meant it. The 911 caller was never identified. The phone used to place the call, a prepaid device purchased at a gas station on Whitemarsh Island, was recovered by FBI agents 3 days after Malik's release. Cash transaction. No surveillance footage available. The gas station's cameras had been offline for maintenance during the relevant period. The maintenance was unscheduled. The station's manager could not explain why the system had been deactivated or who had authorized the shutdown. The phone itself yielded minimal forensic value. Wiped clean. Not casually, not with a shirt sleeve, but chemically, with a solvent that removed fingerprints and DNA, and left behind only the faint smell of isopropyl alcohol, and the certainty that whoever had cleaned it understood forensic recovery techniques well enough to defeat them. The SIM card was prepaid, purchased at a different gas station 40 miles away, also with cash, also during a period when that station's cameras were conveniently non-functional. 2 gas stations, 2 camera failures, 2 cash transactions. The pattern was not coincidence. It was operational security, the kind taught in intelligence training programs, not in criminal justice academies. Whoever had placed the 911 call operated at a level of sophistication that exceeded anything in Chatham County's institutional vocabulary. Dispatch records showed that the 911 call had been routed directly to Grady's unit, bypassing the standard geographic assignment protocol that should have sent it to the nearest available patrol car. The nearest unit at 6:43 p.m. had been Patrol 4-209, stationed 3 blocks from the strip mall. Grady's unit was 6 minutes further away. The routing override had added 6 minutes of response time, 6 minutes that served no operational purpose unless the purpose was to ensure that a specific officer responded to a specific call about a specific man. The routing was manual. Someone in the dispatch system had accessed the computer-aided dispatch software, bypassed the automatic assignment algorithm, and manually directed the call to Grady's unit designation. The modification required a login credential. The credential used belonged to a dispatcher who had been off duty at the time, Corinne Talbot, 12-year veteran, unblemished record, no disciplinary history. Talbot denied knowledge of the modification, denied sharing her credentials, denied any involvement in the routing change. Her attorney, provided by the dispatchers' union, filed a preemptive grievance challenging any disciplinary action on the grounds that the login system's security architecture was widely known to be inadequate, and that credential sharing was endemic to the department's dispatch operations. The argument was credible enough to be annoying and weak enough to be temporary. But temporary, in institutional investigations, often meant permanent. The inquiry into the routing manipulation would extend. Depositions would be scheduled, postponed, rescheduled. The dispatchers' union would file motions. The county would respond. The process would consume months, then quarters, then fiscal years, until the question of who had routed the 911 call became a cold file in a cabinet, in a building where cold files went to be forgotten. Someone had known Malik would be in Savannah, had known his location, had placed a call designed to produce a traffic stop by a specific officer. The implications ran in directions that the FBI was following and that SSA Burris was not discussing with anyone outside his immediate team. 3 days after Malik's release, Burris received an encrypted email on his bureau account. Subject line: Drayton. Cooperation status, / redacted. The body contained one line: confirm asset integrity. Report to by Friday. Burris traced the routing. The email had passed through 2 anonymizing relays before reaching the FBI server. The sender's address resolved to a Department of Justice internal domain, but the specific office was classified above Burris's clearance level. The classification was unusual. SSA-level agents had access to most DOJ internal communications. The offices that operated above that threshold were few, powerful, and did not typically involve themselves in local civil rights cases unless the local case intersected with something larger. Someone inside the DOJ, someone senior enough to have classification authority over an SSA, was monitoring Malik's cooperation file, not the Chatham County case. The cooperation file, the sealed agreement, the investigation that Malik's informant status was designed to serve, an investigation that existed in a different compartment, at a different classification level, pursuing targets that made Voss Grady look like a parking enforcement officer. Burris did not tell Malik about the email, did not tell Zora, did not tell his own supervisor, because the email's classification level suggested that his supervisor either already knew or was not intended to know, and either possibility counseled silence. He filed the email in a folder marked Drayton, unresolved, locked his desk, and went home. He did not sleep well. 2 weeks later, a Tuesday evening, Atlanta. Malik sat in a booth at the back of the Alcove, one of his venues, a jazz lounge on Peachtree Street that operated on the public side of his portfolio. The lounge was closed for a private event that was not happening. Chairs stacked on tables, house lights dimmed. The only illumination came from the bar's pendant fixtures and the laptop screen where Zora was reviewing the civil suit filings Okafor had submitted. The laptop cast blue-white light across documents that represented the institutional aftershocks of a single traffic stop, motions, depositions, discovery requests, the bureaucratic archaeology of uncovering what a county government had buried. Malik's phone buzzed. Unknown number. The display showed no caller ID, no area code, no information of any kind. The kind of stripped call that required access to telecommunications infrastructure beyond what consumer technology provided. He answered, held the phone to his right ear, the ear that did not still carry the faint ring from Grady's slap, though the bruise had faded and the skin had healed, and the damage that remained was the kind that did not show in photographs. Silence. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Then a voice, male, older, calm in the way that only absolute authority or absolute danger produced, and those two things, in Malik's experience, were often the same thing wearing different clothes. Mr. Drayton, you handled Savannah well, but Savannah was a test. The next one won't be. The line disconnected. No click, no static. The silence of a call ended by someone who controlled the connection from a distance that technology made irrelevant. Malik lowered the phone, placed it on the table between his glass of water and Zora's laptop. The screen reflected in the phone's surface, legal documents and a dark display and the ghost of a number that no longer existed. Zora looked up. She had watched his face during the call, watched the stillness that descended when the voice spoke, watched the micro-adjustments in his posture that indicated not fear but recalibration, the subtle physical shifts of a man updating his threat model in real time. Who was that? Malik did not answer immediately. He was processing. Not the words. The words were simple, their meaning unambiguous. He was processing the implications. Someone knew about Savannah, knew the details, knew his name, had access to telecommunications capability that exceeded law enforcement and reached into territory that was either government or something that operated adjacent to government with government's tools and government's impunity. Savannah was a test. The sentence reframed 14 hours of detention, a planted evidence charge, a slap in a corridor, and the dismantling of a county precinct as something smaller than it appeared, as a preliminary event, as a calibration exercise designed to measure his response, his patience, his strategy, his network's activation speed, his willingness to absorb damage in service of a larger objective. If Savannah was the test, what was the examination? We need to move the timeline up, Malik said. On what? Everything. Zora closed the laptop. The legal documents disappeared. The blue-white light vanished. The booth settled into the amber glow of the pendant fixtures, warm, contained, the color of whiskey and old wood, and the particular atmosphere of a place built for conversations that could not happen anywhere else. Define everything. The expansion, the political restructuring, the federal relationship, all of it. Someone is watching. Someone who isn't Burris and isn't County and isn't anyone we've accounted for. They know the cooperation agreement. They know Savannah. They described it as a test, which means the next move, whatever it is, will be designed to test something different, something we haven't shown yet. Zora absorbed this. Her legal mind, the instrument that had kept Malik Drayton operational across 4 states through 7 years of regulatory scrutiny, competitive pressure, and the constant gravitational pull of a system that treated young black men with money as suspects rather than citizens, processed the information the way it processed all information, methodically, completely, without the luxury of emotional reaction until the analysis was finished. If the call came through stripped infrastructure, we're looking at federal-level access. Above Burris, possibly above his division. That changes the risk profile on everything. I know. It means the cooperation agreement might not be protection. It might be exposure. You're visible to people we can't identify in an architecture we can't map. I know. Then the timeline isn't the problem. The problem is that we don't know what game we're playing or who we're playing it against. Malik picked up the phone. The screen was dark. The unknown number had already been erased from the call log. Not by Malik, not by Zora, not by any app or setting on the device. The number had been removed remotely from outside by whoever had placed the call and had the access to ensure that the call left no trace except in the memory of the man who answered it. Some questions did not have answers yet. Some answers came only when you had survived long enough to hear them. And survival, in Malik Drayton's experience, was not a single event. It was a continuous process, a daily practice of preparation and vigilance, and the willingness to operate in uncertainty while building certainty one piece at a time. He had built an empire that way, one nightclub, one property, one relationship, one carefully calculated risk at a time, until the sum of the parts became something that individual adversaries, even adversaries with badges and 22-year careers, could not dismantle. But someone with stripped telecommunications access and DOJ-level classification authority was not an individual adversary. That was an institutional one. And institutions, unlike individuals, did not make mistakes out of ego or prejudice, or the careless deployment of a 2-syllable word that reduced a man to something less than what he was. Institutions made mistakes out of strategy, and strategic mistakes were harder to exploit, harder to survive, and harder to see coming until they were already in motion. The jazz lounge was silent, chairs stacked, lights low. Outside, Atlanta hummed with the energy of a city that moved too fast to notice the quiet conversations happening in its closed restaurants and locked offices and private spaces. Conversations where the boundaries of power were negotiated by people whose names did not appear in newspapers and whose influence did not register on the instruments that measured influence in conventional terms. Malik Drayton was one of those people. He had been one since the day he decided, at 19, that the world's refusal to see him as he was could be converted from a disadvantage into an asset, that the hoodie and the rental car and the quiet voice and the absence of visible wealth were not limitations, but armor that made him invisible to the kind of people who judged threat by appearance and missed the architecture beneath. Savannah had tested that armor, had dented it, had left bruises on his cheekbone and marks on his wrists, and a memory of cold concrete and fluorescent light that would surface, unbidden, at 2 a.m. on future nights when sleep was difficult, and the weight of what he carried felt heavier than the structure that supported it. But the armor had held. The architecture beneath it, the network, the legal shield, the federal relationship, the carefully maintained anonymity that allowed a man who could buy a city block to sit in a strip mall parking lot without being recognized as anything more than a man in a hoodie, had functioned exactly as designed. The question was whether it would hold against whatever came next. Against the test that Savannah had apparently been preparing him for. Against an adversary whose identity was unknown, whose capabilities exceeded his own, and whose interest in Malik Drayton was not casual, was not accidental, and was not going to be satisfied by the outcome of a county administrative hearing or a federal civil rights case. Malik set the phone face down on the table, picked up his water, drank. The distance between a king and a prisoner is exactly one traffic stop on a Friday evening in Georgia. The distance is nothing. The difference is everything. And someone out there knew both, knew the distance, knew the difference, and had decided that both were worth testing. Zora reopened the laptop. The legal documents reappeared. The work continued. The empire operated. The machinery of accountability ground forward at its institutional pace, producing outcomes that were partial, delayed, ambiguous, and, in the calculus of American justice, as close to meaningful as the system was capable of producing without breaking itself in the process. Outside the alcove's tinted windows, the city moved. Cars, pedestrians, the ordinary infrastructure of ordinary life, operating at ordinary speed, unaware that inside a closed jazz lounge on Peachtree Street, two people were sitting in amber light, recalculating everything they thought they knew about power and protection and the cost of being underestimated by the wrong people. The phone sat face down between them. Screen dark. Number erased. But the voice remained. And the next test was already being designed by someone who Malik had never met, in a building he had never entered, for reasons he could not yet understand. He would understand them eventually. Understanding was his business, his talent, his survival mechanism, the thing that had carried him from a composition notebook and a duffel bag to an empire that spanned 4 states and a sealed federal cooperation agreement and a network of influence that could dismantle a county precinct in a single Saturday morning. But understanding takes time. And time, as 14 hours in a Chatham County holding cell had reminded him, was the one resource that no amount of money or power or strategic patience could manufacture. It could only be survived. And Malik Drayton had survived worse. But worse, apparently, was still coming.